activities. I'm responsible for some of the group activities and society memberships as well, alongside my two colleagues. This is very exciting to be part of this first of a kind virtual conference on healthy buildings. Farah will give you some more information in a few moments and introduce some of the speakers. Just a few housekeeping rules. First of all, I hope you can see my presentation. I'm sure you're all very familiar with these sort of rules by now, but microphones off, webcams off, questions and contributions in the chat box. They will be answered after the panel discussion, so there won't always be opportunities for questions and answers after every speaker, just to make sure that the session kind of runs smoothly and promptly. I did send a program that was sent with the link, and CPD certificates will be issued following the event as per usual. And I guess the most important thing really to bear in mind is just to be respectful of the speakers and contributors. But we've got a hell of a lot of people on at the moment, and no one seems to have interrupted, so I'm all very confident. So the regions essentially support the charitable objectives of CIBSE. CIBSE, whilst it does everything to support its members, its main goal is to promote the arts, science and practice of building services engineering for the benefit of the public in general. So that's a very important thing to bear in mind. UAE is a very active region. We also have international regions across the world, ANZ, Australia, Hong Kong, Republic of Ireland. Also, interestingly, we have a number of networks. I will touch upon this at the end, and you can consult me if you have any questions about joining one of our societies, so you can gain membership in a society, or obviously CIBSE-wide membership. We also have free-to-join special interest groups on a plethora of subjects, so HVAC, intelligent buildings, resilient cities. I won't go into them all. And as I said, you can ask me as many questions as you want at the end. Some highlights of CIBSE UAE. So there's the annual dinner, which unfortunately due to COVID had to be postponed. There's regular technical events, and you can follow CIBSE UAE on all the usual social media channels. And just finally, I'm just rattling through these, but just wanted to thank all of the partners for this event. So as well as CIBSE UAE, Alejandro Falcón Chapter, Reba Gulf, the International Well Building Institute and the CIOB have all been heavily involved in organising this. So without further ado, I'll give over to Farah, who will introduce who is far more versed in all technical matters than me, and who will give you a lot of information on the speakers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julian. I hope everybody can hear us well. Hello. Hi, so I'm Farah Naz. I am the chair of CIBSE UAE. Yes. And I also head up innovation for Bura Happold in Middle East. So on behalf of CIBSE UAE, I welcome each and every one of you. So a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, because we have people joining from 4 different continents. So it's absolutely amazing. This is our first virtual event in UAE, and on a topic, healthy building, especially in a very, very sensitive time. So I am really appreciative of all the speakers and panelists and our partners, Reba Gulf, CIOB, Emirates Green Building, Well Building Institute, to join us on this event and actually share their expertise. As Julian mentioned, as CIBSE UAE, we do a lot of events and collaborative talk, but it's mostly around knowledge sharing. This year, we have identified 3 main subject matters that we would be focusing on. One is healthy building, the other one is net zero buildings, and the third one is digital engineering. So you will be seeing this year, next year, quite a bit of events and CPDs focused towards it. Also this year, we want to hold a lot of partnership events with our partners and collaborators to reach out to wider audience and actually have a collaborative discussion in the industry. With this, today's event, the vision for today's event is actually to have an open discussion with different stakeholders across the built environment and actually come up with some ideas for this situation, healthy buildings, and this world that we are facing today. I think we will have a really engaging conversation, and I thank each and every one of you for joining us today. So with this, we will start. I will hand over to Julian Jones, who is the MC of the event, and I will ask each of the speakers to do a very quick introduction of who they are for the people who joined later, audiences, before they start their presentation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hi everyone again. So I'd just like to introduce, first of all, we have Andrew Shaw, who's REBA Gulf Chair, and he will be speaking on designing for livability, design thinking after a post-COVID world. So if Andrew Shaw is ready, I will hand over to him.
Hi there. Hello. You hear me okay?
Yes, Andy.
Yeah. Okay, good. Hi. Yes, this is Andy Shaw. I'm an architect in Dubai. I have a company called AMA, which we set up with a partner, Naji Mahmood here, and I'm also the elected chair of REBA Gulf since January, and we've been changed direction a bit after the events after January, but we've been similarly looking at sustainability and net zero and arranging events online and hopefully back into the real world as well. End of the year, we have a big architecture festival in D3 taking place that everyone will be welcome to go see an exhibition. And I also teach at Heriot-Watt University. So I'd say I've quite a broad knowledge of building and only pockets of depth. So any technical questions I probably struggle with, but I'm going to give you quite a broad overview of current kind of architecture thinking and some projects on the recent hot topics and how has been changed by COVID. Now I need to share my screen. Let me know if you can. Okay. Is this visible?
Yes. Yeah.
My screen's visible. Okay, I'll make it on full. Just tell me, is that you see full screen now?
Not yet.
Kind of.
2 seconds.
There should be a cover slide with a picture and some text. But yeah, can you see it?
You might have to put it on full screen or press play.
Hang on, I think I might have to do. I'll do it the safe way. I'm going to open up the PDF. It's not a bit more reliable than. Let me see that. This one. Okay, is that more of that visible?
It's still not full screen.
It's sometime. Okay, I can make it. If you can see okay, I'll go with this because sometimes full screen misbehaves a bit with online. But if you can, you should have a very big.
It's okay. You can, I think, proceed. Yeah, we can see it. It's a bit small, but we can see it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you can zoom it a little bit. So.
That's probably as big as it goes, actually. But okay, we'll go with this. Well, I'll try full screen, but let me know if this works. Can you see that okay? Well, the first slide of text?
It's still the same, but maybe just carry on.
Okay, no, I think I'll go this way. Okay. Okay. So, okay. Now, actually, I'm gonna. first part of this talk, I wanted to ask a question to everybody, which is to kind of imagine you've just been given a modest sum, a few $1 million, and you're told you can live anywhere. And it's to make you think about the kind of environment you want to live in. So I'm hoping you can type in the chat box, because I like when you get interactive parts on an online webinar. And you are allowed to type in what kind of place you'd want to live in if you had a budget. Could be anywhere. Let me see. I'm going to go back to Teams and see. This. Okay. Okay, I've seen a few answers. Yeah, okay. Good. This is what I was expecting. Okay, that's enough. Okay, I'm going back to my. Okay. Yeah, I had a feeling if any of you had said like Mayfair or Manhattan, it would have ruined my talk. But you all said what I thought you'd say, which is basically something has a connection to nature. And this isn't a house, this is an office. This is Renzo Piano's office in Genoa. But I'm showing this to show that this is designed to really give a space with as much connection to nature as possible, in that it has obviously the views to the trees around it. It's got natural light from above. It's got timber flooring. So almost everything you see here is some kind of even wood furniture. It's like a very natural environment, because I can see from what you put in. You're putting out mountains, sea, beach. This is again another view of the office.
Apologies for interrupting, Andy. Sorry, we're stuck on your introductory slide, on your front cover slide.
Let's see. Okay. Share tray. Yeah. Do you see it now?
Yep, that works. Perfect. Thanks.
Yep.
That's
okay.
better.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I'll just pop up at one. So yeah, I was talking about this one. So this is Renzo Piano's office in Genoa, and showing this connection to nature with light, wood, greenery inside and outside. And then it's actually a very simple building. It's not formal or iconic or anything. It's all about the quality of space. And it is like, of all the architects' offices I've seen, it looks like probably the nicest to work. It's even got a view of the water, and it's on a mountain. So it's like ticking all these boxes for being in contact with nature, because I'm going to talk about, in terms of healthy buildings, the kind of more psychological, emotional side of what you need to feel happy and comfortable in a space. And I think one of the important things, given where humans and how we've come about, we're more used to natural environments, and we always feel more comfortable in them, and that's why we always want to be like near the sea, looking, and even in city, looking over a park is more prime looking at a beach. This is a list of kind of the main materials you have to build with, because as designers, we basically assemble geometry, we assemble materials to make spaces that we then use. And then it gets more complicated, but that's in essence what we do. And I have arranged these in a certain way, and they're kind of pretty obvious, apart from maybe the one at the top. And that light is also a building material, in that it's something you have to control and bring in, as is fresh air and water. And so I put in this kind of hierarchy and coloring that if you are trying to make this healthy environment, you want to kind of maximize the light and the views, there's fresh air, but also having features like water, whether it's a view or some proximity, greenery inside or outside, and using, when possible, the more natural materials, I'd say, like wood, stone, and brick as well, closer to being natural, I'd say, just processed. It kind of always gives a more comfortable environment, and whether that's the internal or the external. But also, as we all know, the reality is the materials we tend to use for practical and commercial reasons is more steel, concrete, aluminium, and glass. And although there's some very nice buildings and famous buildings built with these materials, it kind of pulls us away from the more natural environment that I think we want to be in and we're used to being in. So I think the challenge for engineers and architects working together is how to get more of these qualities into a building and make it functional. You're going to see later lots of very green buildings, and I know it's very difficult in the Middle East to do it. And I think that's the challenge designers in the industry is going to be facing for the next 10 years. And light and fresh air is another problem where you want to have light and fresh air in your building to give a quality of space, but technically and commercially it's not so easy. So again, this is one of the big challenges we face as designers, I feel, is to get these qualities in and make sure the client's budget's being well spent and convince them it's worth doing. So this is actually a picture of one of the first projects I designed 15 years ago, and this is a house. It's in Portugal, so there's a bit better environment to work with than here. But it takes this kind of philosophy of maximizing the natural elements that make you feel comfortable. So that obviously there's a view of the sea and the forest, but glazing is protected from overhangs to stop the heat gain, and there's kind of maximizing the views out. And it also has an internal courtyard garden, which brings in light on both sides and allows cross ventilation. And what's interesting in this building, there's no AC. You can see some little trench heater there, but it's only really used a few weeks a year. And sadly, recently, the climate is heating up a bit, and it probably needs some kind of AC put in. But generally, this works fully from just passive and natural means. And there's a fireplace with burning wood in the winter as well. And you use the sliding windows to bring air through. But it's trying to bring nature in as light, the views to the environment it's in. It's in a rural setting, the internal garden, which has now actually grown quite a bit. And to make a more kind of natural space. And again, there's a good thing in building in some parts of Asia and Europe is that you can get timber and stone much more easily. So here, the main floor and ceiling surfaces are timber and stone to give that feeling. And it's now actually grown with the garden kind of growing into the house to give it really a much more kind of symbiotic relationship with the nature it's sit within. But this is just to show an example of how we can design to try and make this more healthy, comfortable environment. And it's not just the quality of air and things. We have to think of the psychological benefit of having these things. Light and space is very, very important. And some kind of feeling of greenery, or I think just nature. It can be greenery, mountain, sea, beach. Golf course is kind of close enough to raw nature. So yeah, here's the house set within nature. And this is a project in the Middle East our office has worked on, and again, trying to use stone and get more light into the house and views out, because this is on the palm. So I want to talk about the kind of the thinking and discussions I've had between some work with the Future Foundation and REBA about the pandemic, obviously changing things this year. But I think it's important to remember, there's lots of, you see in the media and lots of things about, how to make things more sterile and make restaurants work and things. But I think as we know in the construction industry, it takes really 3 years to deliver a major project. It takes way longer to kind of think about your city planning. And so by the time, if you design a building now, by the time it's finished, I'm sure the pandemic will be over, and we'll be dealing with the aftermath. Financial aftermath is going to ripple for a while. But I think it's kind of, the pandemic is causing some more long-term changes in how we see cities and space, and the whole industry is changing. And one thing that's come up is the pandemic has led to this kind of remote working becoming more not successful, kind of acceptable. So companies are now shrinking their offices and they're letting people work further away, and they're realizing actually I can have a worker from anywhere in the world. So workers are starting to think, where can I be? And cities they used to kind of have cities be this kind of aggregation of business, and like New York, London, obviously being big nodes, and Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Dubai, probably in the Middle East. But now that's probably going to spread out, and cities are going to have to compete more highly on livable, on what is livability, because you don't have to be in a very dense, polluted city with huge commute times in a kind of tiny, dirty old building. Because London's not a very nice place. It's a terrible place to live, actually. There's lots to do, but the quality of the building quality is very bad and very unhealthy, old, and many cities have this problem. Dubai actually, globally, I think is in quite a good place. We have a lot of space. A lot of buildings have balconies, certainly people working in professional jobs and things. But it does have other issues to address to make it more livable And I think to compete economically moving forward, buildings themselves are going to have to be seen to be more livable, and the city, because a lot, as you know, a lot of the developers here, they don't just look at one building, they look at a whole master plan, a whole district, and how they connect together and function as a kind of a city urban unit. So this, I think there's going to be, and I think also everybody's been stuck at home. They used to just be at home a few hours a day, rushing to eat and get ready and sleep, but they spent proper time at home and maybe had a closer look at how they live, the space that they're living in, and the city they're living in and what they can do with it. So it's forced this kind of assessment of where and how we live. And I think the other thing that's happening is, before the pandemic hit, back in January, remember, Australia was burning, and I think climate change protests around the world, and sustainability, climate change was becoming a much more visible and urgent topic. And I think we're going to come back to that. And I'm hoping that with a kind of renewed urgency, seeing that, well, when governments and people, they feel a more urgent threat, they tend to act more collectively and more forcefully. So I'm hoping that now the sustainability climate change agenda has another jump, and we start looking at ways to address it. Because when it comes down to it, having a healthy city and a healthy building, it leads to quality of life, which is really what everybody wants and every country wants and is trying to progress with and proceed with. So to get to that point, you have to have good buildings and spaces and kind of think of the whole city infrastructure and culture and how it can all build up to give this quality of life that I think people are going to be thinking more closely of now, and how they live, how they work, where they live, where they work. So this livability, I think, is going to become a much bigger factor that people look at and think about, how that's consisted in the buildings and cities. This comes down then to the quality of space within your buildings that you're making and the infrastructure supplying it. I'll talk a little bit about changes in mobility. Infrastructure, I mean your transport networks, but also parks and just public services. To do all this, you need a design team, architects, engineers, specialists, but the clients have to be on board as well, and the government setting the framework for it. And the problem with a lot of the things that want to do are often too expensive, or more expensive than the cheapest option. And I think I put on I think the key to getting through this, I put on my election statement earlier this year for REBA Gulf chapter, I highlighted really pushing sustainability and innovation, because I think when they work together, it can help to increase the livability whilst also making it cost effective and more cost viable, especially when it's kind of a very holistic approach and a smart approach. And I think that's something in the next upcoming years, already seeing that the cost of things that are sustainable and also better for the air and the buildings, they're getting cheaper and more affordable, smarter. So I think they'll be more accessible and more common, easy to do. But it's also the job of the clients, the design team and the government to convince anyone spending the money that there is real value in anything you do that makes a place more livable and also sustainable. But to me, the kind of the sort of interchange, a sustainable city should be livable, and it's easier to convince people that you're doing something to make it more livable, better quality of life than sustainability, because some maybe see sustainability as a cost or a necessity rather than actually something that gives a benefit. I'm going to show a project now that we worked on a few years ago with EMAR, which is actually kind of rethinking how people would live in the city. And it's a co-living project, which is a kind of new typology that's emerged in the last 5-10 years or so. And in the West, it came about more from a lack of affordability of housing, and there's some very small units pushed together, more like student housing. But this is a kind of Middle East take, where the idea is here, your building was your community, and you had a relatively small and simple apartment, but you had a lot of amenities, rather than just a typical like lobby and pool and gym. This building had quite a lot more. It had a connection to a park in front, kids' play area, and the lobby had a co-work space, and there was this is a podium with like the quite generous pool, barbecue area, fitness area, and all the podium level was kind of communal areas. So there was a common dining area where you could arrange to have a dinner with either your family coming in or friends there, rather than just in your own relatively small dining area. So you're encouraging a community as well as giving them space. And the lobby had all kinds of activities, more like a hotel lobby than a typical building lobby. So this was before the pandemic, but the idea, and also the rooms had a lot of natural light. The client was very insisted in this case on having all that glass. Normally, I'd have a bit less glass in a residential flat, but they wanted to kind of sell this very happy and healthy lifestyle. And this led to we did a few other projects in this kind of typology, but it was something that before pandemic was showing actually, you know, how you shouldn't just be seeing your house as somewhere where you go and sleep. You know, your whole building can be somewhere where you live and gives you more. Okay, and now I want to talk about expanding up from like a building level to what's kind of going on, I think, in the architecture and construction world for the next decade that I think has been accelerated by this year and the pandemic. So there's I've put here five kind of big themes, and I'm going to show some. Oh,
sorry, Andy.
Okay.
Could you just start to wrap up the next few minutes?
Okay, I'll rush through them. So these, I think, are the 5 things that are affecting our industry the most. The city's going to get more green, and we're seeing that in other countries, and I think we have to think about how we'll do it here. Digital construction is making it cheaper and quicker to build. Prefab is coming back with some much more modular working. Sustainability is getting more visible, and the end of the car era, I think buildings used to be determined by cars, and that's now changing. So this is a prefab project we did for making a hotel and spa, so again with healthy materials and lifestyle. A master plan where actually there's no cars. This whole central spine is only electric vehicles. So there's no petrol cars. The cars go into this parking bay with PV panels. You feed into this zone, and then this is you're only allowed here to move by enclosed electric buses or scooters, bikes, walking, running. And due to the climate, obviously, there's some connectivity and space for more enclosed buildings. So that was pushing really a whole area where there's no cars and trying to get away from the car determining everything, whilst giving cleaner, healthier air and more just open public space to use as well. And to show, this is by Big recently announced. This is there's quite a lot of developments that's appearing now of kind of new cities that are really pushing the kind of health, sustainability, and mobility angles. So again, lots of electric vehicles, lots more natural environment, and I think that's what's starting the last 6 months. You're starting to see more and more. And again, I keep seeing certainly much more greenery in buildings, and I think a challenge for the industry in the Middle East is, well, how do we address it? You can't. This is a real building in Italy, and it's quite a sort of striking image by Stefano Boeri, the vertical forest. Maybe in Middle East it's internal, indoors. Or yeah, maybe we keep all the greenery inside because we have to think about controlled environment. And then this is another real project showing this greenery appearing into. So our cities are starting to get greener, which, going back to the start, it makes it more kind of psychologically healthier, happier. I think than, you know, if this was just aluminium and concrete and steel, then it wouldn't be the same. It gives it something. So I think this is something we're starting to see, and as design professionals have to consider, how do we bring all this into our cities? How do we handle the Middle East? Because I'm aware of the challenges of doing anything green. But then there are some examples that are more regional where it can be done. And you can still make an environment which is just kind of, it is more comfortable between using light, height, space, greenery, natural materials to make you feel more comfortable. That is my last slide. So I rushed a bit at the end, but I think that I covered everything I wanted to say. Right. Okay, Julian?
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, very interesting talk, and I'm sure some of those concepts on livability will be covered in the panel discussion. Obviously, it's very pertinent at the moment. We're all spending a lot more time confined within our buildings and within our cities, so that's very interesting. Next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Gurjit Singh. And he represents Prop Sherpa, and he'll be speaking on healthy buildings and building resilience from more of a real estate background. So I will give over to him once Gurjit is ready. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you very much. I have just uploaded the screen. Julian, let me know if it is up.
Yeah, it's up and it's in full screen. Great.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much to everybody, and fantastic presentation, Andy. Thank you for giving us an overview of what the potentials are going forward in the next decade or so. I think the 5 elements that you mentioned right at the end are extremely pertinent to our discussions today. Well, I am Gurjit Singh. I have been a property developer for the last 40 years in Asia, in the Middle East, and also in North Africa. And the last 15 years of my work has been in the UAE and the GCC. What I would like to actually speak about today is how resilience is being embedded into the built environment, which also includes the overall real estate environment. So mine is not a technical presentation, but it tries to encompass some of the key considerations that any one of us helping any client, or if any one of us is actually carrying out real estate development, we will probably need some kind of ready reckoner to try and refer to when we are looking into the various considerations. So this particular framework that I have been working on, and let me see now whether the slide goes to the next slide. Okay, it's not moving. Right, okay, there you go. This is actually work in progress in terms of building up this resilience framework. But as a segue, there are actually 3 things that I think are going to permeate into our daily working life as technical people or as developers or investors, and that's safety, health, and the environment. I said straight in my first slide, safety, health, and environment. She, S-H-E, she is life. And literally, she gives life, and that's what actually is going to permeate into everything that we do, both in terms of the environmental, social, and governance issues, which are ESG issues, and how investors look at the entire triple bottom line, which is the 3BL. Now, if we look at cities as assets, cities have places. Places are the sub-assets. Within places, you have multiple asset classes. And these are really places where we either invest, we live, or we design. Now, what has happened over the last few months is that the current crisis is both an accelerator and a leveler. It has accelerated a number of things. It has also leveled the playing field for many other aspects of our design, development, and business environment. And what you have seen in the last few months is actually a real physical decrease in the flow of people between assets, between cities, between places. And this has had a massive impact, right? Because it all translates into, at the end of the day, the amount of cash that is flowing as well. So even cash flow has been affected, right? And there's a lot of depletion in cash flow, which has a direct effect on, whether or not people need to build anything new, or whether they actually look at what they already have as an asset and then try to transform or create some form of adaptability to it. There's also a decrease in the use of the built environment, and that is a reality because you have seen the knock-on effect. Some of it is positive, where the overall carbon footprint of various destinations and spaces and places and cities has actually been reduced as a resultant effect. There's also a decrease in the use of places, which is not a fantastic thing, because places are really where people meet, congregate, exchange, and there is an energy around that. What you have seen is also an increase in the flow of information and data. Now, this is a reality again, because exactly what we are doing now, we're having a virtual conference. It's a flow of information, and we're using a data platform. So the transformation of decrease of use of physical spaces and assets to an increased use of information and data is a direct impact on future investment flows as well. Things are moving towards a low carbon, low touch, low mobility type of living. Andy touched on some of those aspects. It's also moving to a slightly high-tech type of environment as well. And these are things that need to be incorporated into our overall design, development, delivery, and the management of our assets. So when I talk about assets here, I really look at cities, how they are managed, I look at places within cities, how they are managed, look at each individual asset class, how each individual asset class is managed. There seems to be some form of de-densification and a hollowing out. It's not terribly apparent, but people are moving away from denser cities to probably places where they would move into single-family homes and where there are larger open spaces. There has been a lot of debate on this. You don't see a drastic movement, but certainly de-densification may be one of the resultant effects of this current crisis. We're also seeing some alternative asset classes coming to the fore. And if you're looking at how there's an increased flow of information and data centers, for example, have become a new asset class, not just in terms of real estate, but in terms of providing the new oil, which is data, right, and how it is managed. So data centers are really agnostic to the current crisis. They have actually built up their own business model, and data will become quite important when we touch on the subject of even the IoT embedment into assets, right? Self-sufficiency is an interesting thing. You are seeing the advent in some countries which have high density, such as Singapore, where you are looking at urban farms actually being created, and developers are building now assets where, you know, apartments or even mixed-use complexes have their own form of urban farms and what you would call vertical farming as well. I also see some trend towards polycentricity in cities where you may have a CBD and people are moving away to smaller areas which were outside the city, which have now become polycentric themselves because people don't need to travel to their place of work anymore. So they live and actually they consume within their so-called decentralized polycentric areas. So polycentricity is actually quite an interesting thing that may come about in the next decade or so. You could say, sustaining sub-cities that are located from the CBD. This is actually something which is really a work in progress that I'm currently trying to build, which is a resiliency framework for the built environment. And I'll just quickly touch through a few of these items so that I kind of, move on with the presentation. Now, the built environment resiliency framework is embedded on the premise that safety, health, and environment is life. And based on that, if we look at cities, places, and asset classes, the main objective is for occupant protection and their health and well-being. This is always the first premise now, I would think, any developer or investor in real estate would look at. If we can create a safe place, if we can create and make a safe place and carry out safe place management, then the livability index goes up. And I echo what Andy mentioned earlier. And if the livability index goes up, then you are basically creating value for the people. Now, what has happened in the crisis is there are impacted occupants, and how you actually cater for them is a question that needs to be addressed. It hasn't adequately been addressed by many cities or places or real estate developers, but it will become a very important impact as people move out. How do you retain them within your properties? Because you need to increase, for example, the retention capabilities and the consumption capabilities as well, especially if they are retail properties. Introducing safe mobility within cities, places, and assets, both horizontal and also vertical, become very important. Population change, as you see some cities, when people get, what you would call redundant, they are made redundant, or they are, retrenched from their jobs, their propensity to stay within a particular location reduces. And if that reduces, then they move away. And if they move out of that location, the consumption capabilities for them within the place also reduces. So demand issues come to the front, they come to the fore. So a demand shock actually is what has happened in the current crisis. From a risk assessment and planning, I think the risk identification, there is a codified process. Scenario planning has become now extremely important. It used to be done by just the consultants. It used to be given in a report and it would go into a drawer. Now scenario planning has become very, very important because of the first wave, second wave, and any other perpetual waves, and whether or not we come out of this current crisis in the short term or the medium term. Business continuity, again, was a theoretical subject by many businesses and enterprises. Now it has become a first priority subject, is how do you retain cash? How do you actually create pockets of cash so that you can actually cater to a downturn? Every time you see there is a closure or semi-closure or new restrictions come in on mobility of people, it affects businesses. So the entire enterprise life cycle risk needs to be mapped out under risk assessment and planning. Government policy and public policy are things that we see on a daily life. Here in the UAE, we see the government very proactive, trying to assist, how protection is given to the population. So regulations change, and the change management has a knock-on effect on many things, right? On design, on business, on cash flow, and also on employability. Customer employee health and well-being. These are 4 different factors that come into play all the time. How do you provide a safe customer experience within your asset? So retail assets now need to carry out some form of adaptability or transformation into other alternative users. How do you provide a safe customer journey? How do you retain your customers, And where you have commercial buildings, offices are now shrinking because 30% of their staff are staying at home and working from home. 70% are still working in the office. In some cases, the ratios are very much different, And how do you retain talent? Because even talent retention moves away from areas which are unsafe. If they do get a different job, they will move away. They may move from one place to another. Mercantile innovation, what this means is how buying and selling is being carried out. So with the advent of e-commerce and with the increase of aggregators who are actually carrying out the delivery of what you bought, so the delivery agents have become quite fluid, and they don't need real estate because it's a delivery. They need different type of real estate, which is really logistics and warehousing. So mercantile innovation has to also filter into the overall asset design and development considerations, which actually impinge both existing and new developments. So we're seeing now existing and new developments going towards a low-touch type of revamp and a bit more high-tech as well, where the owners can afford, where the developers can afford. Clean tech and facility management is being incorporated into a lot of the HVAC facilities, in a lot of the actual facility inputs that are being carried out within a particular asset, and that involves a lot of meticulous, you could say, codification and protocols for different type of assets. Space and spread really means that people are moving to assets which have more space, and they are spreading out further away from the city center if they can afford it, and therefore they are naturally wanting to pay less. So staying away with technology, they don't need to be in the city center, their costs are reduced, they downgrade, they stay in place in assets which have larger spaces for them to actually use as a safety spread. Now, asset conversion, adaptability, and retrofitting is really the key. How our current hotels, how our current retail centers and malls going to adapt, to a reduced customer footfall, and what do they do with this extra space? Those are things that are now going through a lot of developers' minds. Small office and home office, again, what you're seeing here is actually the conversion of residential development into small offices and home offices because of the different requirements today. Self-sufficiency, I touched on it earlier, and that related basically to urban farms and also having your own energy requirements. Technology information security, that is currently now getting integrated into designs. You are looking at IoT to monitor health, to monitor warnings on what's happening. There is a lot of cyber resilience that is needed, and this is in a more docile form where you are informed of health threats within your neighborhood. For the financial and investor security side of things, cash flow integrity is very important.
Sorry, Gurjit, couple of minutes.
Yes. How much are people really going to afford to pay for change? The business, occupant, and customer retention is what I mentioned earlier. Financial impairments by those who have invested is really a key thing today because their value of assets have gone down. Resilience funding is all about keeping and capturing a fund so that you can actually ensure business continuity. Insurance and financial recovery looks at risk mitigation and assurance certification. You're already seeing that happening in hotels where they are getting assurance certification to give assurance to customers. Supply chain integrity, I touched on some of this earlier in terms of alternative asset classes and service providers accessibility. In conclusion, the built environment life cycle of recovery and resilience, I'm using a chart from the Institute of Place Management, which is actually very apt, where it has talked about a crisis phase which we are gone through. We are now in so-called a pre-recovery. Eventually, we will go up to a recovery. And what I've described just now really is a resilience framework for the transformation side of things. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I end my presentation and thank you for being a attentive audience. Thank you very much. Julian?
Many thanks, Gurjit. A fascinating look at trends in cities, building occupancy, especially new developments, resources, things look into data centers. So yeah, that was very interesting. We're now a couple of minutes over the schedule, but next up we have Mona, and she's going to speak regarding the health safety rating for facility operations and management. So I'll hand over to Mona when she's ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see my screen in a second. It's a bit slow on my end, so I'm going to give it a minute. Okay, can you see this?
It's not in full screen, but it might be soon.
Okay, it's showing full screen on mine.
There we are. There we are.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
That's great.
I think it's a little bit lagging. So hello everyone. I'm delighted to be invited to participate in this conference, and as Julian said, I'm presenting on the Well Health Safety Rating, which is a rating that was developed in direct response to COVID-19. A quick introduction myself before we start. I'm Mona Holtkoetter and I'm working for the International Wellbuilding Institute. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and I'm part of the Europe, Middle East and Africa team. Being invited to speak at today's conference is particularly special for me, as I'm a mechanical engineer by background and also heavily involved with CIBSE. I was the chair of CIBSE Ireland region last year, and I'm an active committee member and immediate past chair of CIBSE Ireland. So delighted to be invited to speak today. Can you see my screen? My presentation has disappeared.
It's just gone off.
I think someone else has tried to share, so I think it's kicked me out. Let me try again. Okay. Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, brilliant. So, it's not moving on now. Okay, I think here we are. So before I start into the topic, I'd like to give you a quick overview on the company behind the Well Health Safety Rating. The International Wellbuilding Institute has been leading the topic of safe and healthy workplaces for about the last 6 years. Globally, there are over 4,200 projects that seek WELL certification in around 62 countries across the world. IWI started off by creating a rating system that purely focuses on health and well-being of people and buildings. And the first version was launched in 2014. Since then, there's a few other iterations as well as the community standards. But for anyone who's not come across the well building standard yet, each of the versions that I just showed on the previous slide focus on 10 different aspects that impact on someone's health and well-being within a building. So you can see here the 10 different concepts that the well building standard addresses on the screen. And these include aspects like Andy mentioned in his first presentation, like connection to nature. And each of the 10 concepts include optimal ways to design and maintain a building, as well as company policies that affect people's health and well-being. So this is really basically where our focus was at the start of 2020. But then in March, at the time when COVID-19 became a global pandemic, we decided to launch a task force on COVID-19 and other respiratory infections. So this task force was chaired by renowned experts in the industry, like Dr. Joseph Allen, who works for Harvard, or Christina Gamboa, the CEO of the World Green Building Council, just to name two. And the chair and co-chairs of the task force were joined by over 600 experts from across the different sectors and industry. And the goal of the task force was twofold. First was to create a set of guidelines and respond to COVID-19. And the second goal was to inform the well building standard and the features within the 10 concepts that I showed on the previous slide, and how these should evolve within the light of COVID-19. So the health safety rating that I'm presenting on today is the first output from this task force. And I'll be going into some technical details in my presentation. And so the aim of the health safety rating is to give companies what they need to reopen their buildings with confidence. The rating is an evidence require immediate capital improvements. It really focuses on the operation and maintenance of buildings. The idea is that the health safety rating is really applicable for any facility type. So starting from sports and entertainment venues to hotels, resorts, restaurant, retail, offices, industrial facilities, been designed to be applied to any facility type. And any building achieving the well health safety rating can use the seal to communicate the achievement, to visually demonstrate that the building has followed a COVID-19 response that's based on research, and that the implementation has been checked by an external company. Communication, I think, is very important, as a lot of the interventions that we are doing in the buildings at the moment are invisible. So for example, if you think about increased airflow rates or additional air filtration or increased cleaning practices, might not be visible to anyone going into the building straight away. So the seal helps to make the invisible visible and instill trust. The broad application across the industries, I think, is quite nicely reflected in the organizations and the type of buildings that have enrolled in the well health safety rating within the last few weeks. So the rating was only released less than 2 months ago. And you can see here, I'll pick out a few names, it's quite a lot. And we have some very iconic buildings in the US, like the Empire State Building, who has enrolled. The Yankee Stadium has actually achieved the health safety rating as of yesterday. We have Carrier, Uber's buildings, CBRE, JLL, Land Lease, just to pick out a few of the very long list. So with the next few slides, I'll actually go into some of the technical detail of what the health safety rating is looking at. And within the health safety rating, we're covering 5 main themes. Each of them having between 2 and 6 features. So features is something we call each of the requirements. And if any one of you is familiar with the well building standard, the features are structured in a very similar way. And about 75% of the features that are in the health safety rating will form part of the actual overall well-building standards, the graduated version that's coming out at the end of the month. Of the total of 21 features that are available, projects need to pick 15 to achieve the rating. So let's have a look at the first theme, which is cleaning and sanitization procedures. Based on what we know at the moment, COVID-19 is transmitted through close proximity transmission, further distance airborne transmission, and touch-based transmission through surfaces. And with this first theme, we are looking to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 through surface transmission by keeping surfaces clean and minimizing the surfaces that need to be touched. There are 4 different features in here. We are looking at, first of all, support hand washing, which is about making sure that facilities and soap is available for people to wash their hands, because soap has actually been found to be more effective than hand sanitizers. Reducing surface contact, it just requires projects to identify areas that have a lot of surface contact and determine how that can be reduced. Then we have improving cleaning practices, which is about making sure that there's accountability and instructions on cleaning. The virus is very easy to disinfect, but it requires the right procedures and the right surface to be cleaned, which is addressed in this feature. And then as the last feature on the cleaning and sanitization procedures, we have cleaning products. Here we're focusing, first of all, products that are effective, but then also choosing products that don't cause any short-term or long-term harm. So some commercial cleaning products have shown to have ingredients that degrade indoor air quality, but can also have hazardous materials within them. So some products can emit substances that irritate the nose, eyes, throat, and lungs, and can cause or trigger asthma attacks. So while the use of the right product to disinfect the virus is really important, it's also important to choose products that don't trigger other side effects. The next theme then is emergency preparedness programs. And in this theme, we are focusing on being prepared for emergency situations, which includes respiratory diseases, but also covers other type of emergency situations like natural disasters, fires, power loss, or human-caused disasters. I think on the last presentation, you also talked about the importance of emergency planning. We have 5 different features within the theme. The first one is looking at developing an emergency preparedness plan and communicating it so that everyone in the organization knows their role and actions required if an emergency arises. And then we're looking at a business continuity plan. We've seen that about 90% of small businesses have to close permanently if they can't continue businesses within 5 days, which is not very long. But with this pandemic, we've also seen that, obviously not for all, but for a lot of businesses, they have some possibility of modifying their business strategy. Most of them really had to think on the spot and how to pivot their work to stay in business. And this feature is really looking at having an advanced plan in place for these situations. The third feature then is planning for healthy re-entry, which is looking at different steps the project should be taking when people re-enter the building. And then we have emergency resources, which focuses on equipment and training for emergency situations. So this is not just for COVID-19, but other acute health concerns and requires things like first aid kits or a defibrillator. And the last feature in the topic is emergency resilience, which is looking at ways in which the project can support long-term recovery from large-scale events such as this pandemic. Moving on to the next theme, which is health service resources. And in this theme, we're looking at what can be offered to people within the space so that they stay healthy and to the extent possible while being in the building. The theme is mainly focused on workplace policies and addresses a few important aspects to support employee health and avoid spreading illnesses within the building. So the first feature here is looking at companies to have a policy in place to work for people to work at home when they get sick. So they don't feel pressured or required to come into work, which of course highly increases the risk of transmission. I have one stat from the UK. 37% of UK employees, this is pre-COVID-19, 37% of UK employees go to work sick, infecting colleagues as a result. So providing sick leave and a company culture that supports sick employees to stay at home will become critical in the future. Then the second feature is looking at providing health benefits. So if someone does get sick, they have the resources to get treated. The next theme is related, but focuses on recovery from major events such as this pandemic through mental health support, which I think will gain much more and more importance in the next while. And then the next two features might not look related at the first glance, but they do play an important role. So the first one is requiring annual flu vaccine. Flu infections remain a major seasonal issue and can affect hospital capacity. So any reduction in hospital capacity that are infected by people being affected by the flu can take away from spaces that can be used to treat COVID-19. And then the last feature is looking at a smoke-free environment. Smoking is still a major health issue, but in addition to this, smoking can increase comorbidities for influenza and COVID-19. This, I'll move over to the next theme, which is air and water quality management. And here we are focusing on the operation and maintenance of the air and water systems. In particular, ensuring that the building, which has likely been unused and stagnant in the last month, is ready and safe for re-entry. Again, 5 features here. The first two is to assess the ventilation and air treatment system. For this feature, projects are asked to review the capabilities of the ventilation system and find out, for example, what is the highest rate of supply air in the HVAC system, and what type of filtration or air treatment can the HVAC system accommodate. So the assessment then allows projects to see how much of the guidance provided by recognized industry bodies such as CIBSE can be implemented and what actions need to be taken. And the third feature is looking at Legionella, very important topic. In this features, projects are asked to perform a risk assessment for Legionella, and it's really particularly important when when buildings have not been used and water systems have been stagnant for some time. The air and water quality feature, the second last one on the list here, is looking for further analysis of the air and water quality in the building to inform if there are any issues that need to be addressed. And then the last feature is looking at managing mold and moisture. In the last theme, yeah, I only have a few slides left, thanks. And the last theme here is stakeholder engagement and communication. And here we're looking to increase health literacy and the understanding of the type of strategies that have been implemented. First feature here is educating the employees and building occupants on the interventions of the health safety rating and why these are important. And I think communication is going to be key to provide confidence that the space is doing the right thing. And then the second feature here is not directly related to COVID-19, as luckily there's no evidence that there's a foodborne transmission of COVID-19. But it's important that people have the confidence that spaces are run in a safe manner, and it reduces the overall risk of foodborne diseases and goes back to the hospital capacity I mentioned before. I might skip over this. There's a section for innovation features. I won't go through this into too much detail. And then I have a few slides on the process and how to achieve the Well Health Safety Rating. So it starts at looking at the different requirements in our online system. It's all available online and can be explored through our digital standards. If you then decide to target the Well Health Safety Rating for one or multiple buildings, you can enroll through the online system, would then upload the feature-specific documentation that's required and submit that for review, which then gets reviewed by our third-party verifier, GBCI. And once the review process has been completed, the building can achieve the Well Health Safety Rating, and you can promote the achievement. And there's a renewal of the rating required on an annual basis. Second last slide, quick look at costs for the rating. For small businesses, it starts at 2,730 US dollars. Standard, we're looking at 4,200 per building. And then for really complex high volume buildings, such as shopping centers or airports, and there's a higher price point. But the more buildings are involved at the same time, the lower the pricing point per building goes. If anyone has more questions on this, happy to help out. And with the last slide, I just want to point out a few great resources on the topic. On our website, you can find the overview documents, similar presentation, and the Wellhead Safety Guidebook, as well as all the pricing information that I talked through today. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And with that, I'm finished. Thank you.
Many thanks to Mona. It's particularly encouraging to see so many companies and buildings signing up to the WELL Health Safety Rating. Just at this point, I'd just like to remind everyone to please turn off microphones and their cameras if they haven't done so already. It's very encouraging to see so many people here, but just if you could keep to those two very simple rules. Next up, we have Imran Shaikh. He represents the SSH consultancy, and he'll be speaking on the impact of poor terminal unit design on occupant health and with a look at a case study. So once Imran is ready, I'll hand over to him. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Julian, can you see my slide?
Yep, I can see it. It'll need to be on presentation mode. Yeah, there we are.
Okay, all right. Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Shaikh, and I'll be discussing with you today on the often neglected topic of poor terminal unit design and why designing, selecting, and approving correctly sized terminal units is important, and how the poor terminal unit design can impact occupant health. So let's get started. In terms of the presentation outline today, we'll go through the definitions of the correctly sized and oversized unit, the common myths and impacts of oversized unit, the good practices which we need to take care while we size the correctly sized units. An example of a guest room, what should we be careful about while approving the material submittals, and the practical side of it with a case study. Okay, so before we dive deep into the impacts of poorly designed terminal units on occupant health, it is important to understand the difference between the correctly sized and the oversized or poorly sized unit in a residential and hotel guest room application, where the sensible load is predominant. In this presentation, I'll be touching only on the apartment and the hotel application, where you have the sensible load predominant. Where for the other applications where the latent load comes in, there are other factors also which needs to come in. So let me read the definition out on the slide. It says a correctly sized unit is achieved by selecting the equipment to meet the calculated sensible cooling capacity at the design supplier conditions. Selecting equipment based on the calculated total cooling capacity can in some instances result in higher than desired sensible cooling capacities and supply air quantities. So in such instances, the calculated off-call condition to meet the design sensible loads, preventing it becomes higher. So it prevents the unit to give the required cooling capacity and the dehumidification. Now, an oversized unit is a unit which would supply more air into the space than required and operates at a higher than design off-call temperature to meet the sensible cooling demand of the space. So remember these key differences in your mind. I will demonstrate the impact of the selections with a psychometric chart during the case study. Okay, there are several myths associated to the oversized units resulting in poor terminal unit selection, which is important to understand. So let's go through it in the following slides. So myth number one, more cooling means better thermal comfort, whereas it's vice versa. because when you're dumping excessive air, it not only results in poor air distribution and drafts, it also makes the occupants uncomfortable, which also results in the set point temperature for the reaching at a much faster rate, giving a signal to the FCU control valve, it's a chill water system, to throttle back, or in DX application where you have step control to switch off the compressor. So the result of it is an increased humidity in the space. Now, both of these factors discussed have direct impact on occupant thermal comfort and thus health. The second myth is excessive factors mean a very safe design. Now, allowing all of these excessive safety factors in the lighting loads, equipment loads, infiltration, people density, and the people activities, it increases your sensible and latent load considerations in the space, which results in incorrect heat load calculation and thus poor thermal unit selection. Now, for example, if the infiltration rates, if you have considered for a small volume of space is 0.25 air changes, and you have applied the same factor to a larger room, it will have significantly higher load to the space. So we need to be careful about such things. The third myth is the higher capacity results in lower humidity, which again is vice versa. The poor terminal unit selection or oversized units results in increased humidity in the space due to its inability to dehumidify due to higher off-coil conditions, which can result in condensation, mold, and mildew formation impacting human health. So basically, the myths associated to the poor terminal unit design should be avoided, and good practices, like some of the points which are highlighted here, should be considered while we are doing the heat load calculation for space, which includes the accurate internal parameters meeting the project requirements, the actual lighting equipment and people density loads, apply profiles to it based on the occupancy into the space. And the most important thing is apply a practical sense in considering and applying above parameters. We all know the codes and standards, but it's important to apply it practically such that it meets the requirements of the space and you are not oversizing the system. And obviously, you have to do an accurate equipment schedule and careful system selections. Okay, so now once your heat load is actually carried out with the good practices, correct selection of the unit is equally important. Otherwise, it defeats the whole purpose. So what I generally do, I get the selections for medium and high speed for the terminal units, which you can see on the slide, and the most suitable 5 to 6 models from 2 manufacturers, which I'm happy with the noise performance, dimensions, etc. Now this gives me a judgment to select a fairly tightly sized unit for the heat load calculation by knowing that if the unit performance is not matching at the medium speed for the peak load calculation, it will be still within the high speed mode. And for that shorter period of time, since we are calculating on the peak cooling load, it can still meet the load calculation by putting it at the high speed. And the order of preference to match the calculated load which I follow is the sensible load should be the first priority, which should be equal or less than 5% of the total calculated load. Then the airflow comes in, and then the total cooling capacity. Now again, this criteria is applicable for a space where the sensible load is predominant, like apartments and guest rooms. Okay, so on your screen is a typical air conditioning layout for a guest room, which is normally served by a FCU. This design is more like used in the Middle East sort of region. So I usually size the duct with a low terminal velocity of say 2 meters per second and drill at 1.5 meters per second, with the grills facing 50-degree one-way upward deflection to prevent dumping directly into the occupant. Now, and this arrangement helps me to limit the pressure drop to 22 to 30 pascals because of the lower pressure drop in the system instead of your standard 50 pascals. So what it does, selecting the unit at 30 pascals helps you downsize one unit model in most cases, which not only provides a better thermal comfort, it also provides a better noise criteria for the space. In addition, from the occupant health perspective, there are various merits using a lower velocity duct sizes. Considering the fact that the high possibility of particles, including nuclei, getting carried through the higher terminal, gets carried through the higher terminal velocity. So sizing the grills and diffusers to reduce the terminal velocity will ensure lower draft and low turbulence, and it also helps the possibility of reducing the contaminants getting carried into the return airstream, in combination with the sufficient dilution of the space with fresh air, ideally pre-treated. Okay, so for the material submittal approval criteria, you need to consider a holistic approach. There's no point taking at most care on the design side if the final unit selections are incorrect. Thus, material approval process is very key. So usually I use two steps, which is the psychometric analysis to ensure that there are no fundamental issues in the selections received from the manufacturers or the contractors, and then obviously the capacity comparison with the specified. So you can do the plots, you can verify the total and sensible. It should match with the selections provided. If not, then that raises a question, and that needs to be catered back to the manufacturer. In terms of the capacity comparisons, like I mentioned, for a sensible cooling application, it's better to select the unit with 0% oversizing of the sensible load or -5% of the specified. That is the reason we, in this particular region, we designed with a safety factor provided by the municipality, and so that already caters for that, and you have the different speed options within the FCUs, so which can cater for the slight shortfall in capacity. Okay, so in the coming slides, I will take you through an actual project investigation which was carried out to identify and find solutions for the cooling and humidity issues. So the project was a massive villa community with mixes of villas, duplexes, townhouses. The chief client complaint was the cooling and humidity issues. There were various tasks were undertaken, like the site investigation, evaluation of the drawings, material submittals, and carrying a heat load calculation to validate the actual installed calculation unit. So in terms of the deliverable, we put in an assessment report highlighting what were the possible causes and what are the possible remedial measures. In terms of the existing system description, it was a standalone 1-to-1 DX split unit, on-off type, non-inverter, in-ceiling ducted FCUs for bedrooms, dinings, and living rooms. Mid-wall split units for the maid rooms, and dedicated extract fans for the toilets. There was no dedicated pre-treated outside air provided. It was only through the infiltration. Okay, so the main objectives of the site survey was to identify the cooling complaints from the occupants and the humidity complaints. So you can see the occupants were raising concerns on the indoor air quality as a result of mold, mildew, damp smells, etc., which is obviously harmful for the human health. So one of the methodology we used for one of the room was to put the temperature and humidity data loggers for the FCU in the living and dining area. So one was placed at the supply air grill, and the other one was placed next to the thermostat in the return air. So this is
a couple of minutes, Imran.
Yeah. So this is the findings from the data loggers. What this one is the supply air grills. The blue line is the supply air dry bulb. The red is the relative humidity, which is normally 90-95% RH for the supply condition. So the interesting fact is the supply condition spikes up to 15 to 20 degrees centigrade, which is very high for the off-coil condition. Now the spikes which you look at is the compressor switching on and off. So for this instance, it was switching off every 8 to 10 minutes. Imagine every 8 to 10 minutes you have the noise issue of compressor starting and stopping. This was the return air data logger, where we noticed that the supply air condition or the temperature was maintained within 1 to 1.5 degree centigrade, but there was a spikes in the relative humidity, mainly because the compressor switching off and switching on for longer periods, resulting in humidity to grow up, which was ranging between 53 to 78 degrees percentage. So main findings was the units were oversized. It was resulting in increased humidity levels. It was resulting constant compressor switching on off was resulting in noise complaints. There was condensation issues related to high humidity because the supply air was below the room dew point condition. So there was a lot of formation of mold, mildew, and dense smells within the villa. When we did the capacity reviews, there was several other issues that the units were selected on total capacity. A lot of safety factors were considered. Design was for untreated outside air on the fan coil units, whereas on site the outside air is through infiltration, resulting in incorrect on coil and off coil conditions. Specified FCUs were with higher ESPs, and all the villas were carried out based on the calculations were carried out based on the worst case orientation. So basically the units were, when we did the calculation and compare it with the as installed, the units were oversized by 144% for the living and kitchen units, 154% for bedroom and living, and 103 for the maid room. So there was massive oversize. Now when you look at the possible remedial works, now given the oversizing factor was so high, you have to actually replace the existing oversized split units and provide treated outside air to keep the spacing positive. Or we can replace the existing oversized with the new correctly sized units with the inverted technology. The last was the least preferred one, but it was like putting bandage onto the problem, is to install localized dehumidification units. So that will increase the sensible load in the space to somehow mitigate the overshooting of the off-coil conditions. So the main reasons why this was the oversized units factors results in was the poor dehumidification, overcooling, frequent compressor start-stops, noise issues, and obviously the health issues pertaining to mold and mildew formation. Okay, I would like to conclude the presentation with the attached calculation sheet and the following psychometric chart analysis. So what you see on your left-hand side is a revised calculation with the correct parameters, input parameters, through practical analysis of the space requirements. So when we did that, the resultant humidity at 22 degree centigrade temperature set point was 54.7 degrees, which was well within the ASHRAE CIBSE defined humidity criteria. But when we now to highlight the impact of the as installed oversized unit, which is a poor terminal unit selection, we manually entered the higher airflow of the actual installed unit in the villa for the same zone with the same correct optimized input parameters. So you can see the resultant humidity shoots up to 68%, which is not recommended from a thermal comfort perspective. You can also see the impact on the off-coil condition, which has increased from 12.8 to 16.3 degrees centigrade. Okay, so now if you plot these conditions on a psychometric chart, it provides a clear picture of the performance of the correctly sized terminal unit versus an oversized terminal unit based on the same actual practical space input parameters. So you can see for the tightly sized unit, the off coil is much lower, which results in better dehumidification and lower humidity. And based on the increased supply air, the unit actually pushes up to the higher off coil condition, which results in little to no no dehumidification, which leads me back to the definition which I mentioned in the start of my presentation, that an oversized unit is a unit which would supply more air to the space than required and operates at a higher than design off-coil temperature to meet the sensible cooling demand of the space, which is very prominent from the psychometric chart. Okay, so to summarize, I would recommend as a minimum the following do's and don'ts for the proper terminal unit sizing. Always enter calculated values in the equipment schedule. If you have to group the FCUs together, then the on-coil, off-coil, and the capacities needs to be psychometrically matched and not just put in randomly or round off randomly. Units should be tightly sized for the accurate design conditions. Do not over-specify the FCUs, especially for the guest room and apartments, as maximum you have very short duct runs in majority of the cases. Do not apply the worst case orientation heat load for all these spaces, and do not keep control on the return air sensor for the guest room. This is debatable, but my preference is to keep the control on keep the temperature sensor in the space so it detects the actual temperature. So all of this needs to be factored in for correctly sized terminal units and avoid issues like mildew, which impacts human health. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. And back to you, Julian.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you for that look at the poor terminal unit design on occupant health. That was very interesting. Next up, we have Hassan Younes. Hassan represents GRFN, and he's also a representative of the Alejandro Falcón chapter. He'll be speaking on COVID-19 and buildings, especially HVAC recommendations for reoccupation after lockdown. I'm sure you've all seen that recent reports suggest that COVID-19 is airborne, so I'm sure this is going to be a great look at that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Hassan.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
Just 1 second.
Just at this stage, I'd just like to remind guests that ideally you should stay on the call for the duration of the whole event, and that will make sure that you receive a CPD certificate in time.
Can you see the presentation or not yet?
Not yet, Hassan.
Just 1 second. Can you see it now?
There we go. Yeah, we've got it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hassan Younes. I'm the director at Griffin Consultants. I'm also the Alejandro Falcón chapter president. I think Mona's presentation earlier spoke a little bit on the issue of COVID and kind of gave us an overview of the requirements in buildings and how to keep buildings well and safe. This presentation, we're going to talk about specifically the HVAC part of it. So we're going to talk about the mode of transmission of COVID, is it airborne or not, the ASHRAE guidance, and then go through the commercial building recommendations from ASHRAE. So modes of transmission, I think we've all been hearing about this for a very long time. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19. It's thought to spread mainly from person to person through respiratory droplets. Infectious droplets are produced when an infected person coughs or sneezes, affecting adjacent people. So for a long time, we've been told that keep social distancing, 2 meters, that should be keep you safe. However, recently, I think things have started to change. ASHRAE from day one kind of went through the way of saying it could be airborne, so let's take the precautions. So ASHRAE statement on airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2, transmission of SARS-CoV-2 through the air is sufficiently likely that airborne exposure to the virus should be controlled. So that was the stance of ASHRAE from day one. Also, ventilation and filtration provided by HVAC systems can reduce the airborne concentration. Unconditioned spaces can cause thermal stress, because some people thought that, okay, maybe we should disable HVAC systems. As we know, especially in the UAE and the GCC in general, we cannot really live without HVAC. If you turn off the HVAC, we have other problems like thermal stress and poor filtration. So we should not turn off HVAC. Actually, HVAC systems can help us in reducing the risk of infection. Now, going into the ASHRAE guidance, there was an epidemic task force that was set by ASHRAE that provided a set of recommendations that keep on being updated. So if you go to the ASHRAE website, go to the COVID page, there are a lot of resources on building readiness and different typologies like schools, hospitals, offices, residential. And it's mainly around the CDC requirements, and also based on some ASHRAE research from previous and current developed papers. So for the commercial building recommendations, it's quite similar to residential, but here we're focusing on the commercial buildings. First, you need to implement measures that help occupants feel secure. I think that was also covered by Mona earlier. So require occupants, visitors, maintenance personnel to wear appropriate PPE as per the CDC recommendation. And this is, depending on where you live, probably the municipalities have similar requirements. Screening and monitoring and controlling circulation of occupants and guests to help avoid transmission of disease by using thermal cameras. We see them here a lot in malls and other places. Some people or some buildings use infrared thermometers. Thermal cameras kind of give us a bird's eye view on who's entering, who's leaving, and it will show us a better picture rather than just having one person with a thermometer. Could be sitting at his deck, could be leaving for some time. So having thermal cameras that is recording is good to have. Increasing frequency for surface disinfection or frequency touch surfaces. Again, that's mainly from the WHO, because that was thought that was the main way of transmission, which I think at the moment is also being rechecked. This is the important thing of our topic today, reviewing the maintenance and operation of current HVAC systems. This includes mode of operation of HVAC systems, the sequence of operation, set points, schedules, and verifying that equipment and systems have the enhanced capabilities to address public health considerations. Now, what are the main things that we need to look at? The thermal comfort zones or range is very applicable to also staying safe from coronavirus. So being between 22 and 24 degrees C and a relative humidity between 40 and 60 has been proven to let's say you have a better chance of not catching the virus if you are staying in that range. So temperature between 22 and 24 and humidity between 40 and 60%. Now the thing is, if you look at the ASHRAE guidance when it comes to thermal comfort, like ASHRAE standard 55, or the indoor air quality, which is 62.1, we didn't have a minimum humidity requirement. And recently, I'm personally on the 62.1 standard main committee. There's been talks to see if we should add a minimum humidity requirement. Currently, the humidity requirement used to be 60% maximum and 62.1. Recently, in 2019 version, that has been changed to a 15 degrees C dew point, which is a little bit more stringent than just having a 60% RH. Review of ventilation materials, dampers, filters, economizer seals, frames should be intact and clean, making sure that we don't have any bypass around the filters. Recently, I think a month ago, there was an article, a study that was done in one of the US hospitals, and they found actually viral RNA, coronavirus viral RNA on multiple locations within the AHU, on the filters, on the dampers, and the ducts. So that means in that particular location, although they had really good filtration, probably the filters were not properly sealed. And it also shows that that viral RNA is traveling around, so adding the possibility that it could be airborne. Now, zone and air temperature, humidity, and CO2 system sensors should be calibrated. So if you are using and still using CO2 sensors, which is not really, we shouldn't be using DCV during pandemics. We should be able, or we should be providing the maximum ventilation that we can. I mean, up to the ability of our equipment and the capacity of our equipment. Making sure that the building automation system controllers, the sequence of operation is proper, the sensors are giving the right readings in terms of temperature, humidity, CO2, airflow sensors as well. Air handling systems are providing adequate airflow. There are no blockages in the duct system. For example, any closed fire and smoke dampers. I've done multiple audits in here, and I always find things like a closed damper that for whatever reason it's closed, and I have a very it's a sad experience where it was a building where the fresh air was being bypassed to the outside. It's just like getting cooled down, filtered, making a U-turn and exiting the building without going into the apartment. So in that case, we're cooling the air, filtering it, but that smoke damper is in the wrong position. It's just basically we're throwing our money out of that exhaust louver, and the required fresh air is not getting to the apartments. Exhaust fans are functional and venting to the outdoors, especially in toilets. So in terms of operation, we need to have continuous operation of all systems is recommended, or flush outs. So we're going to talk about flush outs later. Last slide, we'll talk about flush outs. Increased outside air, especially on air handling units, when you can increase the fresh air or the outside air quantities, it is advisable to do that. Now, unfortunately, we are in the summer period, and maybe the capacity of our equipment will not be enough. Now, luckily, if you have oversized equipment in that case that can handle the increased outside air, which is really hot and humid nowadays, that also helps in reducing the viral load within the building. Flushing sequence, so if you cannot run it for 24/7, you can run it maybe 2 hours before starting the building and maybe 2 hours after occupancy. Continuous runs of toilet exhaust system. It has been shown in some cases where the virus is being transmitted through drainage systems. So keeping exhaust in toilets running all the time is crucial, especially that toilets normally are small and you can have high viral loads inside. Operating standalone air cleaners, so portable air filters that has very high filtration levels, maybe MERV 16 as per 52.2 standard, or HEPA filters. Some come with UV, some come with carbon filter for smell. So they're really good to have around congested places. They're a bit expensive, and you need to make sure that they cover the area that is inside. Let's say your office. If your office is like 100 square meters, you can't expect having one of those small standalone air cleaners to clean the whole office. You need to have more than one. Filters, very important. Update or replace existing HVAC filtration. Try to move to MERV 13 on your air handling units, or the highest compatible with the filter rack. Seal the edges, making sure there is no bypass, limiting bypass, the minimum. That will ensure that things are being filtered rather than being bypassed. Now, the problem here is that you might not have enough fan capacity. So when you're doing the selections for these filters, make sure you get the pressure drops. And it doesn't mean that a MERV 13 from different manufacturers will always have the same initial pressure drop and final pressure drop. You have a lot of different combinations, and we've seen that from previous studies. So make sure to ask from different manufacturers and see which one you can have in your make sure that you can have some of those in your in the capacity of the fan. Using UVGI, so ultraviolet is also could be something that you can use. You can install it on the cooling coils to clean the coils. That will help also in reducing the maintenance of the coils, because less buildup of organic material will happen on the coil. But also it can kill the virus. However, you need to make sure that it has enough intensity and the air has enough time to pass through. Actually, we're having a course with ASHRAE Global Training Center on UVGI, I think in the coming weeks. If you can go to the website there, you can check it out. It's a 3-hour course by William Bamflis, and I'll be doing the Q&A at the end. Very important thing in energy recovery ventilation systems, a lot of misconception here, and also fear from air going from the exhaust to the fresh air. So cross-contamination does happen on energy recovery wheels and happen on plate heat exchangers. So make sure that the system is running in a proper way. As you can see here, the fourth arrangement that's not recommended, this is not, if you have that arrangement, make sure to change that. What we normally see in our buildings probably is arrangement number 1. So where you supply air is kind of draw-through arrangement with the wheel, and then the exhaust also is a draw-through arrangement. That's what we normally see in our buildings. This probably gives the best, the lowest cross-contamination from the exhaust to the outdoor air, but that we normally don't see that, and there are other problems with that arrangement from an efficiency point of view. We see more of arrangement number 1. Arrangement 4, if you have that, that's a big problem. Now, what do we need to do when you have these heat recovery wheels? I've seen a lot of clients trying to turn them off, but you cannot turn them off in this heat, because you'll end up with a very high humidity in your offices or apartments, since these wheels take a lot of the latent load and the sensible load out of your fresh air load. So in order for this, for the wheels to be running properly with the exhaust not going into the fresh air. So if the fresh air goes into the exhaust, that's no problem from a coronavirus point of view, because in that case, the exhaust is not being sent back to the building. From an efficiency point of view, both of them in either way, whether it's going from the fresh air to the exhaust or from the exhaust to the fresh air, it has an impact on efficiency. But from a health and safety point of view, we always want to avoid the exhaust going back into the fresh air. So we need to make sure that the leaving supply static pressure P2 should be at least 0.5 inch greater than the entering return pressure or the exhaust pressure P3. And at all times, SP1 and SP2 should be higher than SP3 and SP4. So you need to do these kind of measurements on your system to make sure that you don't have leakage from the exhaust to the outside air. If that's the case, keep running your wheels, no problem at all. If you want to have more information on that, ASHRAE has published one document just talking about energy recovery wheels. You can find more information there. Now, this is my last slide.
2 minutes.
Yeah, that's my last slide. So talking about flush outs, once occupants leave the building, you can flush out the building after they leave or a few hours before they come into the building, because there are no viruses being released now since there's no one in the building, let's say for office buildings. So here we can see the outdoor air changes, so from 0 to 6, and you can see the amount of time you need so that you reduce the concentrations to 90%, 95, and 99%. We normally would want to do this. 95% is reasonable. And as you can see here, a flush out duration of 2 hours at 2 air change, or so as you can see here, for 2 air changes per hour, need less than 2 hours, maybe 1.5 hours, so that you flush out the viral load to less than 95%. And any kind of pollutants that are not being generated within the building, corona being one of them, you can reduce that to 95%, by 95% for 1.5 hours. So depending on the air changes per hour, which is easily calculated, you could just look at the ventilation and exhaust flows that you have and look at the volume of the building, and you can deduce the air changes per hours that you have. Based on that, you can decide how many hours you need to keep that ventilation system on. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hassan. Obviously an extremely important subject at the moment. Next up, we have Shrikant Sharma. Shrikant represents Bureau Happold. He'll be speaking about perhaps our two most valuable currencies these days, data and people. So his presentation is titled A Data-Driven and People-Centered Future. And he will be looking at COVID-19, the significance of resilience in our buildings and how people should always be at the center of design. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Shrikant.
Thanks very much, Julian. I hope you can see my screen so I can get tracking, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So my name is Shrikant Sharma. I work for Bureau Happold. I am a mechanical engineer, but I'm not practicing as a mechanical engineer. When I look at a HVAC system or pretty much any system in buildings, I'm looking at their impact on people and how we can use data to drive some of the decisions about that will enhance the key sort of four groups of KPIs, the metrics that we know our built environment has massive impact on, and that's the people, place, planet, and profit. It translates into a lot of really interesting conversations, presentations we've had today, which is health, well-being, productivity, but also safety and vibrancy, carbon. And we know how significant disruption COVID has caused into many of these parameters, fundamentally about how we as people occupy these spaces and how we would be going forward. So a lot of my time and my team's time over the last couple of decades has gone into studying human behavior, how people use these buildings and spaces, and how computational modeling and the new data-driven thinking can help us create better spaces. Now, there's a couple of big challenges that we have with significant impact that building makes to the world. One is about efficiency. We know the material, labor, and productivity challenges that's been around, and it's getting better, but it's an ongoing challenge we have. The bigger challenge for me is the uncertainty in the performance of the buildings. And often it comes down to efficiency in terms of energy and performance, but it's also about people, the experience, the productivity, and the uncertainty in being able to predict how busy, how empty, how vibrant, how engaging a space is going to be. That's one of the biggest handicaps, I would say. And the driver for this handicap is just our understanding, which means data, and it means insight. So how do we bridge this gap? Now, fortunately, we're moving into a world where there's just billions of devices, sensors behind each one of these systems that are helping us get better, deeper understanding. But it's still the question about how do you take all that data and translate into space, people, planet, all of the parameters we talked about. How do you make it really easy to digest and engaging to the whole supply chain in the industry? So here's an example. Those sensors, we worked with Current in GE and with Vodafone, fitted some of their office buildings with sensors in the lighting, in the ceiling, and they were measuring all sorts of things, including human location, and movements, the space utilization, meeting room utilization, etc., and also the temperature, humidity, and energy side of things. What we did was we put those onto a very, very simple dashboard to start to gather all the usual information about CO2, noise, temperature, lighting, humidity, etc., but also information about people. And the ability to then start to look at the interaction between all of these, where people were spending their time, how long they stayed at the desk. And all this data is human body heat scanning. So you got it's all anonymized, We start to see occupancy of seats, of meeting rooms in cafe areas when the people are going past one another, and where they bump into each other, where they start a conversation. And some of these KPIs start to become then the driver for what a good working environment looks like. So we were able to now start to dig into things like most of the meetings are really only occupied by up to a couple of people when they're designed to be much bigger. So you could quickly conclude that you can save a lot of that meeting space there. The CO2 level mapping on top of where people are actually spending their time, we could see that there's a third of the time was exceeding in the CO2 threshold. So productivity gain that you can have by providing the right level of fresh air at the right place, right time. And then, of course, the less tangible, which is when do people interact, where, how long for, and what drives it, and what can you do with all that information. So we started to use some of that. But like I said, my interest is always about getting all that data and looking at the ultimate impact for the organizations, which is around the people, place, planet, and profit. And in this case, we then stepped back with Vodafone, created a very simple platform that mined data from 3,000 plus different properties across the globe, $1 billion spend a year. We were quickly able to analyze and compare those different assets to see which ones were more efficient. What was it that others were consuming more cost, and we were able to very quickly demonstrate how you could save a significant, you're talking 40-50 million worth of cost from their portfolio. So really getting that data to firstly understand very microscopically what's happening, to zoom out and say, what does it mean in terms of the asset performance? While gathering all of this data, we are also looking at getting a deeper understanding of how people use spaces. And this is an example on office, but we do museums, airports, university buildings, pretty much any environment where you can grab this data of various sorts and then start to build a predictive model. So now we are saying, here's a new design or an existing design of an office with a different layouts. By being able to manage who goes in there, staff, visitors, different departments, what they do, when and how much time they spend, etc., I can actually start to see what a typical day in life of this environment is going to be like. By modeling, we can now start to see different KPIs. KPIs like where people are spending their time, utilization, but also where they're likely to collide and interact with each other. So I can very quickly do different environment, different options. Option A, where it's more external periphery circulation, versus option B, where it's much more centralized. And it's workplace, elevators, cafes. So these simulation of human behavior is quite advanced now. You can start to see even microscopically what's the layout, how many elevators and all. This is making it now super accessible. And it's not just what happens within that environment, but you could take pretty much any space and say, what's the value of that little development? And we talked about some of this before, the concept of healthy building or high performing building or space has got so many components. What's the view? What's the access, the daylight, the interaction, the productivity and noise level and all that? And could you, using the same approach as before, with having understood through data how humans use these spaces, how they perform, could you also build design tools, simulation tools that give us, in a very real-time sense, a model where I could be at the master planning stage, be massaging the shape and size of the building, the height, the orientation, and start to see what impact that will have. And once I've set up my parameters, really churn through thousands of different options And each option should give me a score about each of these parameters. And if I could do that, again, I've got a tool where at the very early stage of design, I could be predicting and modeling, and therefore be better in control of those parameters that I care about. The analytics and the simulation technology is moving at such a big pace that you can now start to do some of this simulation in a very, very early stage, conceptual stage, where you may just have a little sketch. On that sketch, given the behavior of people in a typical day, I could be looking at that front desk or that security entrance to an office floor next to the elevators. What's the right optimum orientation? And it's not just inside the building. You could also do it on a master plan space. So how do people use the space between the buildings? And what happens if I was to pretty much in real time draw a little wall there, a little water feature here, how I could influence that human behavior in the different usage scenarios. This is where we start to co-create a lot of these solutions with the design, with the architects, with the client sitting in the same environment. And sometimes now we are even beginning to empower the client with tools like this one we did for Heathrow Airport, where they could be planning these scenarios in real time on a web-based tool and be testing what impact, how much stuff they need to have in immigration, in check-in, etc. So clearly, data and the human behavior research has been driving a bunch of good research and development, and really taking away reasons for us to have too much space for that inefficiency or lack of productivity or better performance. And we thought we were getting there, right? And then came COVID, which absolutely disrupted in a massive way about how people are using all of these spaces we are talking about. And one of the things we immediately started doing as a research piece was what is the change in in people's behavior? So we mined all the data from all the 2,000 or so staff that we have in Bureau Happold. This is the amount of time and the number of meetings people are having post-COVID. We normalized every bit of data that was there until the beginning of March. And so that's the baseline, the zero line, let's say. And suddenly you see there's a 250% increase in number of online meetings, the duration of online meetings, and et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean in terms of our use of space at home, in the office, elsewhere? If we were to come back in under social distancing, what would the office look like? So we started doing research about using the same tools, our understanding data, but also looking at the changed behavior and the changed occupancy level in the office. Using the predictive modeling, we are now looking at if every person was walking with a 1 meter radius around them, every time the two circles intersect, they turn red. And you start to see very quickly that our current office design is not really conducive. You have to bring the occupancy levels significantly down if we were to work with social distancing. And we ran then 20, 40, 60, 80% of occupancy. And you see that somewhere here is where you can go get back to office without changing too much. We partnered with a furniture company to look at, again, a typical office. This is how tricky it would be with 100% occupancy. Now you can turn that into 50% and it should be okay. You can maintain social distancing, you can have some bit of interaction, but by being clever about the design, you can now say those rectangular long desks, what if you turn those into more radial? What if you had a simple messaging and signage with more unidirectional flow around? You could significantly increase that occupancy level. This is one of the dimensions where you can start to see how you can bring those tools into the design of the future office buildings, and not just the office buildings. We've also been looking at theaters, lecture rooms in classrooms, in schools and university buildings. What is the percentage that's safe without changing too much, and then how you can increase that by reorganizing the spaces. What kind of operational policy do you need to have in place to manage the social distancing through one way and on stairs that are up only and down only, etc. So this is how you could be looking at maximizing the still keeping the level of interaction and the operation going with as much occupancy as you can. We are in fact partnering with a great number of universities in the UK, where we've developed this methodology, firstly for this interim period where you've got COVID, therefore social distancing need, set fixed number of amount of space that the universities have. What does it mean in terms of a static spatial capacity for each room? How could you add a temporal component? So do you bring students back for 5-10 hours a week? Is that in a chunk or is that distributed? So what does it mean in terms of overall capacity, timetabling? What does it mean in terms of the whole campus flow and internal building flow? Going over to saying, so as we develop better, deeper understanding the interim, as we manage the interim period, what does the future look like? How do we make our buildings and spaces to be more resilient, more flexible, for better just maintaining this health as we get back to the new normal, which is we know it's going to be pretty different. So this is it. This is my last slide, which is saying, so we know COVID's caused massive disruption. There's a lot of change, and some of this change is irreversible. We don't quite know what the future is going to be like. Is this trend going to be sustained? Is it going to keep increasing, or is it going to actually come back to normal? We know the answer is somewhere in between. All this, we don't quite know the future, but really using data and our understanding of human behavior and how it's evolving through all this period is going to help us prepare for whatever that future is going to be. So that's me, a whistle-stop tour of data and people-centered future. My contact details here, and I'll also share the slides with other presenters. So any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Many thanks, Shrikant. That was a great look at that, at the subject. Next up, we're going to have a panel discussion. But before that, can I just remind everyone to please turn off your cameras? It's particularly disruptive when presenters are trying to, impart their knowledge. So please turn off your cameras and mute yourselves. It's been generally quite good, but just a further reminder. So next up, as I mentioned, it will be the panel discussion. Farah Naz, who's CIBSE UAE chair, if you don't know, will be moderating the discussion. And we have a number of speakers, some of which have already contributed, as well as a further couple of speakers. So please, Farah, go ahead.
Thank you, Julian. So may I speak? Please ask the panelists to turn on their camera. Amruta, Jim, Mona, John, Farah, not me, the other Farah, Andrew, Gurjit, and Alejandro.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
I think we're missing. Hello. Do we have a Jim? Can you turn your camera on, please? And John, Shenton.
I think my camera's on.
Can you see me?
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone. A big thank you to all the speakers. It was a really interesting discussion in terms of your experience and your thoughts. So I'm sure we will have some questions. To the audience, if there's any questions for the speakers, can you please put it on the chat box so we can pick it up towards the end of the panel discussion and have a collaborative discussions. So welcome everyone. This is the last segment of our symposium today. Thank you all for your patience and for being with us. I know it's long, 3 hours, but hopefully last part would be quite interesting in summarizing your thoughts and process. So the topic of the panel discussion is how would the landscape of the building industry look after the COVID? And the whole idea is to bring in collaborative thinking to actually put together what your viewpoints are, as we all have experienced COVID in a different way because some of you are in different part of the world. So just to highlight a few things, healthy buildings as a movement started 20, 30 years ago, and it has always been part of the thinking process, but now last 5 to 10 years there's have been a more stronger focus. Secondly, we have climate emergency that has been declared all around the globe last year, which actually puts a healthy building movement with the energy movement kind of side by side. And thirdly, we are all living through a pandemic. We have all experienced the pandemic and experienced it in terms of our personal lives and also our professional life. So I would really ask each of the panelists to be very open in sharing their information. And what we would really like to get out of this panel discussion is some really good thought process and collaborative thinking that our audience can take forward. Now, some of the speakers who are not part of the panel discussion, but please intervene and join if you have anything to share. We will try to keep to the time, but more ideas we have and more collaborative we are in this thought process, I think that would be quite fun. So the first question that I have for the panelists is that what are the challenges that we as an industry face in terms of healthy buildings? So this is a question for each of the panelists to ask. So please, may I start with Farah, and then we can move forward. Yeah.
Is that like the post-pandemic challenges, or is that the pre-pandemic challenges, or is that all challenges?
I'm very happy that you asked that question because Alejandro is asking the same question to me. What I would say is what we face as a challenge pre-pandemic, of course, but then of course the second part of that question was I was about to ask is post-pandemic, what do you think the challenges are? And probably maybe those challenges have been redefined in certain ways.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I agree. So, I mean, pre-pandemic, I mean, to set the scene in the UAE, you said healthy buildings has been a movement for the past 20, 30 years, and it has really been advancing in this region more recently, obviously with the emergence of various building standards, such as one other one that you were talking about earlier. And some of the challenges that we have perceived is probably being able to relay the advantages of healthy buildings to let's say business owners and real estate owners. That's something that we have experienced. So people, as a people, we know that we want to live in a healthy building. We know that we want to work in a healthy building and study in a healthy building, but then defining a healthy building is a challenge, and also what are maybe some of the commercial advantages that healthy buildings can offer, and that sometimes acted as a barrier in implementing strategies into buildings that can make them healthy. Post-pandemic kind of shifted everything because then health and safety in buildings became kind of a priority, and not in the obvious way of we focus a lot on health and safety in general as a culture and in the construction industry, but then it became different. We're talking now about social distancing, we're talking about indoor air quality. So it kind of shifted the conversation into, if we had healthy buildings, Hassan talked a lot about the benefits of fresh air. Had we done all of that when we were talking about their benefits, we could have probably mitigated some of the changes. So I think the challenge is now, post-pandemic, is really on very different levels. And I don't want to hijack this conversation. I'll just say quickly, we need to design our places differently in terms of HVAC systems, but also architecture and interior design, and obviously then look at the construction, more off-site construction, more probably prefab and using smart technology. What are we going to do with construction workers camps, and also then operation. One of the biggest thing is psychological safety of people to start to be able to venture out in the world. I mean, some of the research that was just presented on modeling of people was very interesting. And then the slides came, and then COVID came. And that was my question. How are we going to create this psychological safety and environmental safe psychologically spaces for people to be able to venture out into their work, their offices, everywhere really? I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we will face as professionals in this industry.
Thank you, Farah. I will move to the other panelists, but may I please ask, we are running a bit short of time, so can you please keep your responses very succinct? And thank you very much. So, Amruta? You're on mute.
Hello. Yes. Hi, everyone. So one of the challenges I would like to focus on pre or post pandemic is education of our occupants and end users. Because what we do generally as professionals, we design the building based on the studies, and we predict occupant behavior, and we comply, or sometimes we go above and beyond the codes, regulations, or certifications like WELL, LEED. Then we follow best practices during the construction, source technologies, materials, sustainable technologies and material. At the operation stage, we create O&M manual. We perform tests like air quality tests. We conduct occupant surveys. We also give signage for education. But in reality, our occupants, and I'm sure most of you will agree, you have seen neighbors, friends, and people outside of our industry are not aware of basics of best practices of keeping their home healthy. Let's say air quality, even if the no smoking signage is there, you get to see people smoke inside their house, they feel it's my house. Or they don't know the basics when you're opening the doors and windows to outdoors, and if your AC is on, all the dust will go inside. Very simple best practices I'm talking about, and definitely much bigger than that. But through my experience of educating society through my website, Sustainability Tribe, I've seen my readers asking questions, or when I'm sharing information or knowledge, basic best practices, they didn't know, they never heard about it. And I think our challenge is engaging the end user, our final consumers, occupants, get them on this bandwagon of creating healthy, sustainable buildings or maybe cities. If we educate them, if we involve with them, we can get a better feedback, better data collection could be possible, which we can further use to enhance our design for future. Also, we can basically contribute, our industry can basically contribute to SDGs, more sustainable movement overall. We can also contribute to circular economy. We can basically close the loop if we involve our end users. And I think that is one particular challenge where we have a great opportunity of creating behavioral change in the society as professionals if we share our knowledge and include society into this entire movement.
Farah, you're muted. You're muted, Farah. Yeah. Farah, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Amruta. Alejandro, do you want to go?
Yes, why not? Due to my professional position, or my approach and opinion on challenges is more from a buildings perspective and infection control. So what I first found as a challenge is that we were all having lack of preparedness and readiness, mainly in commercial buildings, hotel, offices, residential, public assemblies, etc. And why? Simply because these buildings never were susceptible of infection control plan. No epidemic response emergency plan was required in those buildings and only in healthcare facilities. So what happens? Let's call it, the super spread that has actually happened this time due to the pandemic did not happen in a hospital, it happened in other buildings which were not prepared. So this is a big element that I saw creating issues, and we can consider as a challenge. And all this came, this lack of preparedness came together with an economic drop, lack of financial capacity to respond to that from building owners, operators. And when they went to the market to see what can they do to fix these problems, they also found with the famous law of the offer and demand, there was an ethical market where many manufacturers, vendors were supplying non-tested, well peer-reviewed equipment just to cover from the lack of stock of proper equipment. So all this was kind of a vicious circle where which complicated, the building evolution and let's say the response capacity to the issue. Another thing, simply misinformation, overall misinformation quite a lot. Hassan touched on this before. He said initially it was said COVID is just non-airborne, it's just conveyed through droplets, but this was not really true. It is all related to the relative humidity we have on the space. If spaces are very dry, what happens is the infectious droplet simply evaporates in the air. So it's this very small particle, 0.2 microns, just stays in the air. Only when you cough, you sneeze, basically that, because it's together with the, let's say, water droplets, that falls in the floor, and there is a bigger opportunity to get it clean with the clean material devices. So this misinformation also creates confusion in the people and perhaps the building owners on how to proceed. And also, a key aspect, and it's not technical, it is, let's say, sociocultural aspect. I mean, the gatherings here in the UAE, expat community, we people tend to gather. People, is reluctant to be home, and then also eat. The eat family gatherings is culture. You cannot really change the people overnight and say, look, stay home, don't go to your family. And that actually, let's say, worsened the situation. Now, in the UAE, it's been discussed about a second wave, and the authorities are saying they observe actually an increase in the cases after Eid, actually. So there is a lot, the challenges can be actually approached from a number of angles and perspectives.
Thank you so much. Gurjit? What do you think the challenges are from a real estate perspective?
Yes, for me, the challenges are how fast will actually asset owners adopt the approach to creating healthier assets. When I talk about assets, I'd also talk about the fact that there is the built environment, which is not just pure real estate. Now, just listen to this equation, and it applies even when there was no such thing as COVID. How do you create value? Value is actually directly related to the occupancy, and occupancy gives a rise to a multiplier effect of occupant stay and occupant spend, and that gives value to an asset. Today, there are less occupants, and therefore there's less value. And how do you increase the value of an asset today? Owners need to understand that by creating healthier properties, healthier assets, the overall capitalization rate actually improves. What does that mean? When you create healthier buildings, people will gravitate to healthier properties, and therefore occupancies will increase. At the same time, the safety and health issues actually improve the attractiveness of an asset. And that gravitational pull, I don't see it yet, because people are now, dearth of cash, and that cash scarcity is actually making them adopt, I would say, token precautions against the current crisis. But all that needs to improve, and I like the modeling, because the modeling will tell you that at the end of the day, how much space you really require for new properties. I also foresee that in the future, you will be building less, and you will be building actually safer, destinations, safer assets. And each of them will come with an assurance certificate. An assurance certification comes from, consultants like all of you, providing the design for newer properties, and also actually the retrofitting and the refurbishment of existing assets. So the future for me is there will be less assets being built, more assets which are current in use being adaptively reused into healthier destinations. That's my take so far. Thank you.
Farah, you're on mute
Farah,
again.
Apologies, sorry. Andrew, do you want to share?
Yeah, there's many challenges I could mention. I think following from what Gurjit was saying, is even before the pandemic, there's a feeling in this region, and particularly UAE, there's too much quantity and not enough quality in the construction, and everything quite rushed in design phase. We'd always like to actually get engineers involved much earlier, but it's normally things that are wanting to be kicked off very quickly with a quick image and vision done, when there's not time to do proper analysis and even briefing with the client as to what they really need, what the market needs. So I think the challenge is to kind of slow down and think. And I think there'll be another wave of building coming soon in the region. It's already happening in Saudi, but I think the UAE especially. And to maybe just stop and think what needs to be built, how's it going to be built, how can the government and clients make sure it's high quality, and not just kind of. There's always been a lot of bottom line driven work where it's just pushed to kind of look good without actually thinking how it might really work and how will it really serve what it needs to serve, and probably just control the amount of the different types of space being built.
Thank you so much. Jim.
Yeah, hi. So when I came here in the year 1998, almost everybody told us that the best of the construction was behind us. But I think there was a lull for about 3 years. And I think the best of the construction, the modern day construction that we see around us, was after the year 2000. The marina, Dubai Marina, was established in the year 2000. GLT was established in 2002. And the Business Bay was established in 2003. And all of it was constructed almost in about 10 to 12 years. Now with this came the huge challenge was where is all this power going to come from? Because there's a big draw on the power plants. So where is the energy going to come from? So that's when it forced the developers to think on the lines of going green. So we are in the solar hot water business. I'm going to talk more about that. And it became a natural thing for developers to think where I'm going to bridge this gap between the energy that is going to be provided to us and what I need for my building. And that is what made the developers and the end users think in terms of going green and a more sustainable technology.
Thank you so much. John.
Yes, certainly. Just to pick up on that point, I think it's very, very impressed with the comments by Andy, Gurjit, and indeed Jim there. I mean, no building, no human being, no built asset exists in isolation. I think the COVID situation has demonstrated to us that the impact of our infrastructure is more spatially and functionally pervasive than we actually initially gave it credit to. Now, I'd say if we take the example of Dubai, we've got an example here from a gentleman who's been here for a very long time, who was told that the best of the building boom was behind him. And actually, we actually know there have been a huge number of developments since that date, and a huge number of built assets that have been constructed. Now, I would posit a thought that possibly we haven't actually developed the infrastructure that connects those assets together to the best of our ability. And so I think what the COVID situation has demonstrated is that in terms of being able to have some sort of common ground between these assets, between these people, there certainly needs to be some investment in our power infrastructure, in our transport infrastructure, and those sort of social and the social and cultural links that exist between us.
Thank you everyone for sharing. My next question is actually aligns with a question that's coming from the audience, Sarah Zahidi. We are in a COVID situation. We are all in the building industry, and I'm sure in the last 6 months you have seen how the thinking and the designing has, I would like to think, have shifted a little bit. Now, with this perspective in mind and with all that we are facing, if going forward as we design new buildings or look at our existing buildings, what would you think are the top 3 points from your perspective that the building industry should be looking at? Now, I would really request all the panelists to be very succinct with mentioning top 3 points, not go too much into discussion, because that will lead to a second question that we would be having. So can I start with John, as you were the last person who answered? Should we start with you, and then please jump in after John finishes? Whoever wants to jump in, please jump in. Yep.
Certainly, I'll pick up on your point there. I don't think it's just about design. I think it's about project delivery. So I think we need to look at our project delivery method. It's fine if you've got an illuminating design, if you've got a fascinating concept, but that naturally needs to be realised on the ground with a contractor who might not have the strongest appreciation of your design deliverables. So I think you need to have your contractor involved from the word go. I think you need to have them involved in the design process. I think you need to look at your design gates. I think you need to look at your approval process in terms of who you're involving.
So it's process, contractor, and project delivery, right,
yes.
John? Okay. Alejandro, 3 points, very brief.
Transforming the priorities of the construction. Currently, we are coming from a previous arrangement where the priority is to maximize space program, then capital cost, energy cost, maintenance, and then perhaps design guidelines, how to design to the systems to minimum guidelines, and reliability was the last. Now we should be focusing on having system performance first, reliability, then maintenance costs, and only then energy cost, investment, and the space program and rentability per square meter, perhaps with connotations.
So it's the economics part that should come as in a relevant conversation with healthy buildings, right? Yep. Gurjit? I think you're in mute.
Right, apologies for that. I think 3 of the most important things that pertain to existing assets is the ability to carry out adaptive reuse. And adaptive reuse needs a very quick and fast economic assessment of what kind of adaptive reuse. After that, I think safety, health, and environment protocols need to be established. You need to create a safe space for people to come back and reuse. And I think then you are looking at the life cycle costing, which is the economics of carrying out the adaptive reuse forward. Those are the 3 points.
Amazing. Andy? You're on mute.
Yeah, 3 points I'd see. Much more aggressive sustainability requirements, whether on-site, off-site, just really forced through more urgently. More time to design things and get things approved. And I think remove the car from civic life. Well, not remove the car, but remove its effect on urban design, its dominance on urban design.
Thank you. Mona? You're on mute.
That seems to be the theme of this.
I started it.
No, it's good.
Is it unmuted now?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah, the system is reacting really slow, so sorry about that. I think for existing buildings, the first key point we need to look at, I think, is how the buildings are maintained and operated, looking at the key effects of respiratory infections that we're struggling now with. But I think then on a second point, and for the future, I think we need to look at a wider aspects of how buildings impact on our health and well-being. And that includes much more than respiratory infections. And I think there's a lot we can do, in particular with the existing building stock.
Okay, Amruta?
Yeah, so some of my points are already covered. So one of which obviously is giving more attention to sustainability from design, construction, up to operation stage.
Okay.
And of course, I will include the education part where we want to involve more occupants. And thirdly, the adaptive reuse point, I would like to highlight that we have to look at our facilities management differently, especially given the COVID situation. And there is definitely something more we could do. And whatever the existing processes and procedures are there, there is a huge potential of development over there.
Thank you. Farah.
Again, I think some of the points I wanted to talk about were mentioned, but then yes, starting with flexibility and resilience. As someone mentioned, we already are seeing certain buildings that are now being repurposed for other things. So in our future designs, we should always keep that in mind. How can we be resilient to pandemics? And then I'd like to focus more on the people part, engaging them in some sort into the design process, at a high level, community engagement, so that they can get insight and get empowered, like to understand the impact of certain things and how they can use them. And then post building and operation, ensuring that all the systems that we have in place are people who are going to operate the buildings, train them and understand how they're being used, because that's something that we can improve on now, but also the people who are using the buildings understand how to use these systems for them to be effective.
Thank you. Jim?
I think most of the points are covered, but I would like to say something different.
Yep.
Is that in being a supplier today, there is quality, reliability, and long life on one side, and there is the cost on the other side. Unfortunately, everybody, all the developers are looking at cost. So how would you get both quality and long life material in place? I think that for me is the biggest challenge now for the next 2 years.
Thank you so much for raising that, because business case of healthy buildings has always been a question for the built environment, and especially that you now with the COVID situation and all the points that was covered by the panel. I think that's something we really need to have a conversation with our clients and collaborators. Now, I'm aware that we have 10 more minutes in the panel discussion, and I really would like to open up few questions, and any panelist who wants to join in, please join in the conversation. So there's a huge driver now of repurposing of buildings, especially in retail spaces, hospitality. There's a huge driver right now creating healthy hospitals, healthcare facility. So in these three sectors, commercial, hospitality, healthcare, what are the, I would say, key design decisions that are currently you think can influence the industry in terms of these building typology? It's an open question to any panelist who wants to take this up and respond.
I think, Farah, I have perhaps some couple of points on this. I believe, in line with what I said before, and also responding one interesting point from Jim, clients actually, and operators, owners, they look at the cost. But there is, I would say those times are gone. Now all after 805,000 people, who have died unfortunately due to COVID. Let's say a response from authorities and governments will be driving this. There is a lot of research going on. There is a lot of tests in new equipment, new technology going on. All that will probably change regulations, and from there we'll have to take on our industry. So what I would say in design, one of the important things is the segregation. This is important in healthcare, something that that was not there before. Main entrance was kind of common. Only there was emergency on the side, but HVAC systems were actually common. Now it is important to repurpose healthcare so that there are complete units with totally independent corridors, with independent infection control plan, independent HVAC systems, only for those. These spaces will have a higher number of isolation units, higher number of ICUs negative, higher number of operation theater for, let's say, contaminated people. And this will definitely change quite a lot let's say the approach from an architectural perspective. because before it was in a different way, and this is what we need to tackle now. In a commercial, retail, and all of that, we need to actually come into a collaborative design environment, architects, engineers, all together, so that we see what is the best plan to move forward. From a LVC point of view, we definitely need increase fresh air everywhere. This is not only healthcare now. Now we have to have a mindset of healthcare in non-healthcare buildings. So increase outdoor air, increase air dilution, so the particulates are removed from the space earlier, increase level of filtration, balancing well the spaces. Here architecture plays an important role on the partitions. Increase all of the BMS and monitor and control systems, which allow to actually set an epidemic mode in the BMS. It might sound a little, raw, but it's like this epidemic mode. What will this do? This will be reading humidity sensors. It will disable DCV, demand control ventilation. It will close dampers of air return to the machines, and will try as much as possible to expel it to the outdoors. So we're looking at a complete different picture here from a technical perspective, and perhaps also from an architectural and sustainability perspective as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Does any other panelists would like to join, or can we move to yeah, hi Mona. Yeah, please. You're on mute.
Sorry, it always takes a minute to unmute me.
That's okay.
Perfect. So I think for the three sectors you mentioned, commercial, hospitality, and healthcare, I think any of the key design decisions that we change with what we know now, we really need to evaluate the value of it in the future, in particular if you consider how long the construction timelines of projects are. But I do think that once we do that evaluation, a lot of the design changes or importance on other aspects, like the health and well-being aspects, will stay important even after COVID-19, if there's such thing as after COVID-19. So, for example, increased hand washing facilities or increased ventilation. There's other evidence apart from respiratory infections that really highlight the benefit of these things. But I think really an evaluation of the design decisions for the future will be really important.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think Jim touched on a very important topic, the business case. So as a panelist, how do you think that the business case of these conversations would sit with our clients and our collaborators? Do you have any view on that? Everybody's thinking now.
Yeah, I think in my, since no one is jumping, I'll jump. Basically, from the business plan, what I just said before, like we need to change the priorities and enhance the well-being and the comfort of the people first, taking opportunity of the issue of the pandemic. We need to, we understand also building owners and operators. So we need to make an exercise that can be something like a monetization of the benefits of the infection control in the people versus cost. So we can do studies where we kind of cost, we make a price, we make a cost studies on what will this mean for their pockets. And then we can make them understand on the other side how this benefit the people, because we should not forget that buildings are for people. Buildings are not for cost saving. So in the end, you may save cost, the typical current approach, you may save cost today in reduce investment, reduce energy, but if the people get sick, which is essentially what has happened now, you lose the business. So you, in short time, you save, but you lose in the long term. So demonstrate that the benefit you're gonna get by increasing the well-being and the health of the people will keep the people happy, will keep them more protected, more safe, and you can actually regain the people and the public trust on the building itself. They will feel more comfortable, and in the long term, they will see this return coming back. Yeah.
I think just to add to that, Farah, I agree exactly with what you're saying. First of all, there's this CapEx and OpEx study that can be done to show the benefits of implementing such strategies. But then exactly as you said, these spaces are all people-centered. If people don't feel safe to return to them, then as you said, they lose the business. So it's kind of become more of a priority for them to sustain the longevity of their business, to at least undertake the studies of these strategies that we're discussing.
Thank you so much. I will move to the question from, sorry, did anybody want to share anything?
Yeah, I wanted
yes,
to make
please.
a point of a certain developer without taking their names. They bought 6 prime properties in prime locations and wanted to build high-end buildings. And the first one, they wanted it to be a LEED platinum rated building. Unfortunately, they couldn't sell a single apartment there. And very quickly, they had to scale down from gold and silver and back to no LEED. And they had to sell or make sure that the construction was at a very low cost to be able to sell. Now, sustainability and good design comes at a cost. And also, we need to educate more the new generation. That I was in a college recently, and it was good to see that the students understand what is green technology. They've imbibed it and somehow inculcated in them that, yes, in the future, we got to think differently. But the current mindset of the developers, unfortunately, is a little short-term, and we have got to change that somehow.
Yes, definitely.
That's a very important point.
We need to ask them what costs more, the buildings or the people's life. That's the question. They need to actually maybe digest and.
It's so difficult to change.
It's also not only people's lives. Like just one example I'd like to give, maybe 10 years ago or more, you wouldn't have, let's say, gyms or like running tracks around the buildings. But now, 10 years later or more years later, this is almost a must in each building. So regardless of whether platinum and LEED and gold, I'm just talking about how health kind of has evolved in different places in how we build buildings, and that is going to continuously become, the standards will be higher, people will want these things in the places where they live, and I think the market will respond to that, to provide this for the people and their occupants.
Brilliant. Now I'm just going to focus a few questions on the... Hello?
You're vanished.
Sorry. I would like to add one point here, if may I?
Yeah, please. In a minute, please. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Just one angle where to make the healthy or sustainable building as a business case, I think when the developer, when we are talking to developer and when the developer is looking at the overall big picture of making their business more sustainable, then it definitely makes a great business case to build socially, environmentally sustainable, where wellness is also taken into consideration. And I think we should definitely focus at the bigger business case of sustainable business models where mostly big corporates are moving towards. So I think that is definitely one of the angles we should look into.
That's a very important point, Amruta. Thank you for raising that, because the business models are now becoming more agile. And that's, I think, what we will see as the impact of that in the movement of climate emergency and also healthy buildings. Now, very briefly, I want to move into a policy discussion, and there are some quite interesting questions that came from the audience. So one of the questions is, what does the panelists think if the existing green building rating system needs to be updated with wellness factors focusing more on human health? Does anybody want to share any of your views, especially Mona from IWBI point of view? I have a question connecting to this, is that if anybody is not going for a IWBI rating system, but do you see the good guidelines that comes from your rating can be integrated and embedded into the current policy discussions?
Yes, thanks, Farah. I think it's a great question. Obviously, the policies can be integrated no matter what. The online standard that we have available goes into listing the different criteria, but also goes into really linking the research behind it. So you'll find a lot of information on why these criteria are there and why these are important. The benefit of certifying is obviously that there's someone there checking that these things have actually been implemented, and it's checked by a third-party company, and you can also communicate it. But I think in terms of the well-building standard, so LEED is focused on sustainability, which includes people, planet, and profit. So there are aspects in the LEED rating that do address health and well-being, of course, and those have overlaps with the well-building standard. The well-building standard focuses 100% on just health and well-being of people and buildings, and we actually have documents that we call crosswalks that show where those different items overlap. So what we see quite a lot in the market is projects actually pursuing both the sustainability rating as well as the well rating for buildings, for healthy buildings.
Thank you for sharing that. Does any other panelists would like to share any of their view? Yeah, Andrew, I knew you would say. I was about to come to you. Yeah, please.
Well, I just want to share a couple of. We know we live in a very commercially driven world, and a lot of design decisions get made that way. And often, actually, because I've been told by clients, because that's what the buyers, the clients want. So we all have a responsibility to push for better things. But I think ultimately the government has to come in, and any country has this, and put in the floor for what is acceptable to make an acceptable built environment as regulations. But I think the way things are going, maybe the green accreditations are on quite broad sustainability, but they should maybe only focus on to target climate change, only focus on carbon, and just say you need to have you've got your building cost in dirhams, dollars. You need to have your carbon cost at zero to build anything. And wellness, all other aspects of sustainability, which are non-carbon, which includes lifestyle, wellness, quality of air, greenery, all that stuff should really be could be separate, because then you're really targeting the climate change issue and the separate parallel issue, which is how do we improve our quality of life. But one of them is really about trying to protect the planets from the climate change threat, which is much more linked to carbon dioxide in there. And the other is just, well, how do we make sure we have a proper healthy environment? And there's something happening in the UK at the moment. They've loosened up the planning regulations, but they want to make sure REBA's recommending there's a minimum standard for space, light, air that makes buildings livable. Because otherwise developers will just squeeze the life out of buildings, sadly.
Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else?
Quick one just from me. I think there are overlaps in the things that you said, Andy. So for example, reducing carbon dioxide and trying to have a better indoor air quality in general will then impact people's health in terms of respiratory. So we're not only looking at climate change and carbon reductions only for that. There are a lot of overlaps between the various things that you said that also coincide with health and well-being. So what I'm saying is we can achieve a lot of goals with one stone. The other thing about the current legislation, obviously, we can all acknowledge that there is legislation that covers health and well-being in some aspect, but it's not so much focused on health and well-being. It looks at sustainability in a generic form. So we do have an opportunity as a country to kind of focus on that more. And I am aware that we do have some legislation that's due to come out from Dubai about healthy buildings, and I wonder how the post-pandemic situation has influenced those standards, but we're still to find out.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we are kind of going to be closing our panel discussion. And at this point, I just want to say to all the panelists, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. Just very quickly, I want to reach out to the speakers who were part of the conference. Is there any thoughts you want to share with us before we close the panel discussion? Reaching out to Imran, Shrikant, Hassan, because while we are having a panel discussion, everybody's having a very interesting conversation on the chats. Imran, Hassan, Shrikant, do you want to share something?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I would add on to the discussion which we had in terms of the green building and adding the wellness factor and what Alejandro was touching in his discussion. The dynamics are changing. We don't know when the COVID-19 will go away, or we don't know if there will be a second wave coming in. So there is a very important requirement of having a legislation in place where the occupant or human health is considered as a priority, which might need some updation on the green building side, focusing more on this particular aspect. May it be increasing the fresh air requirement, to improve the indoor air quality, or be it flexibility in design from the architectural side, or in general the overall sustainability and well-being. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Hassan, do you want to share something?
I think one more thing to add is the infrastructure. We probably will rely more on sensors, and we've seen a presentation on trying to figure out where people are and having all that kind of information, doing data analysis. So I think from an infrastructure point of view, things will change. We have more people that will be working from home. Hospitals, we need to be readier for the next epidemic. So from an infrastructure point of view, a lot of things need to be changed, and we need to adapt to these changes, not just from a building level, but from a city level and a country level as well. Thank you.
I think, Farah, just from my side, if I may say something on the behalf, obviously, of the Emirates Green Building Council. I'm sure you're all aware of EGBC and what we do in the region, but I'd welcome to form potentially focus groups on how we can tackle this more and break it down into more, let's say, implementable ideas that we can put out there for the region that can benefit the industry. We do a lot of work in the health and well-being program. We're on the World GBC's Better Places for People. I mean, we do a lot of work in that space, and one of the main aims of the EGBC is to cultivate this culture and get experts like yourselves on a panel. So if anyone would like to participate in those expert focus groups to discuss this post-COVID situation in our buildings a bit more, I'll speak to the team in EGBC, and hopefully we can all kind of continue this conversation as well. Farah, I don't know if we've lost you or if you've all lost me.
She's on mute, but also camera we cannot see, so I'm not sure if Farah is there. Maybe she lost connection.
Potentially. Is Julian there?
Julian, maybe you can pick up and wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, are there any further contributions just before we wrap up? I'm conscious that it's almost, the time's almost up, so.
Yeah, I'll Shrikant here. I'm happy to just add up, build on what we just heard, which is, it's all back to the human dimension, right? Buildings are for people. A lot of time we as designers, engineers, focus on the systems and the pipes and wires, and I think bringing that human dimension is especially important in the new world that we are moving into. Data analytics, insights, I would say, that drive a lot of our decision needs to be pretty accessible, I would say. And that's where some of the conversation around modeling, the scenario planning is how do you bring all that back to the very early stage of designing, early stage of refurbishment discussions, reuse discussions, making those tools super accessible, not just to us as designers, but also to the very non-technical audience stakeholders we are engaging with. I think that becomes quite important. So back to my original point, but that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to add one small thing. As a property developer, I'm looking at quick and easy, fast things to implement to make my buildings safer and healthier. And we all actually talk about stuff which we want to do, which takes time, but the today and the now is that we need people to come back to our properties so that they have a longer visitor stay and a higher visitor spend. And we don't have much capital to spend on stuff to change systems and so on and so forth. So amongst all of you, I'm sure you have quick and easy implementable tactical plans that we developers can use so that we create safe properties for people to return. And I think that is the key for the here and now. The future, we can always talk about it, you know. The here and now is that this is going to stay with us for a long time. This recovery has a very, very long tail, and everything is focused on capital and cash retention. So if you mesh that all together, give me a quick and easy solution that keeps my buildings safe is really what I would look at. So that's just my rounding up comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm back, but can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
The internet drama continues, okay? Okay, so I just wanted to reach out to everyone and say to each one of you, thank you so much for being part of this discussion. It has been absolutely amazing. I would also like to reach out to say the audience, thank you so much for joining us and posing those questions. It has been absolutely amazing, and we really look forward to collating the information from today's symposium and actually publish a proceeding. So you will be hearing from our team members, Izora, myself, as we reach out to you. And lastly, I want to say a big thank you to our organizing team, Nizam Ahmed, Nicoletta, Imran, Alejandro, Izora, thank you so much. And lastly, Julian, for all the support. Oh, Farah is clapping. Amazing.
Yeah,
thank you.
they deserve all that applause. Thank you, guys.
Amazing. So I will hand over to Julian to close the event, but everyone, it's great to have you with us, and we look forward to having these conversations more often.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic event. We've had up to 150 people throughout the event. We've had 120 minimum. So it's been, from our perspective, it's been a complete success. I'm conscious that time is marching on. So I'm just going to share some, just a few short slides on routes to membership. Some of you may be external to CIBSE, but some of you may be membership, but please do stay, and it'll be a quick whistle-stop tour throughout your membership options, okay? So let me share my screen. So as I said, I'll just rattle through these. So first of all, benefits of CIBSE membership. So we've got the journal that's frequently pointed to as the our #1 member benefit. The knowledge portal, thousands of pounds worth of guides, some of them up to £100. So obviously, if you're a member, those are all included in your membership. Continual CPD, events such as these, but all sorts of events really, and obviously networking. Let me just rattle through these. We've got our entry grades, so we've got your student, your graduate, and your affiliates. They require no kind of formal assessment. And we also have the corporate grades. Some of you may be familiar with the structures. And they have accompanying Engineering Council registration. So your chartership, so that's your chartered engineer, your incorporated engineer status, and your EngTech status. And there's a number of benefits to holding professional registration. Something that I particularly wanted to touch upon, as I know a lot of you are external to CIBSE. So whilst CIBSE is obviously building services oriented, we do have a number of societies. We have the Society of Light and Lighting. That comes with a membership structure of its own. So that's for lighting engineers, public health, the Society of Public Health Engineers, which are called SOFI, and Society of Facade Engineering, which interestingly incorporates a lot of architects. I've had an application from a building pathologist. So it's very varied. We have an Institute of Local Exhaust Ventilation Engineers. They've been particularly active recently with COVID and how local exhaust ventilation can minimise the spread of COVID. And lastly, for those operating within digital engineering, so your BIM technicians, digital engineers. We also have a Society of Digital Engineer, and all those societies come with their own membership structures, and you can gain a designation after your name, and you can be an accredited facade, local exhaust ventilation, public health engineer, etc. This may also be of interest. You can join one of our many groups for free. We've got groups for building simulation, daylight groups, energy performance, HVAC systems. The list goes on really, and we run a lot of events, and that's my team as well who run these events. But you can join all those for free, interestingly. When you join CIBSE, you get a region automatically attached to your subscription. So this kind of gives you entry to all the regional activities. CIBSE UAE of late has been incredibly active, which is great to see. We've got regular technical events, online and physical, before this whole saga. The annual dinner and awards, which, as I mentioned earlier, has had to be postponed. But you can keep up to date with the UAE activities for all the usual social media channels, and you can even access the minimum design guidelines for Dubai, which were launched earlier this summer. And just lastly, there's a lot of support we can give. So if you were considering membership for any of our grades or for any of our societies, please do get in touch, and we can guide you through the process. And we want to encourage members. It's wherever we can. And just lastly, my contact details if you need to get in touch and you'd like to inquire about any of our CIBSE grades or societies or group memberships. And that's me. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and we'll stay in touch, and we'll circulate the meeting presentations, we'll circulate the recording. And lastly, thanks to all the speakers, thanks to all the participants, to all the collaborators from fellow institutions, and thanks to all the guests.
Thank you.
I would just add something lastly. Sorry, Farah, go ahead.
I was just going to say we should take a virtual food group photo.
Okay.
I was going to say fruit photo.
But I just wanted to say it would be really amazing if all of you leave us a comment on our LinkedIn page about your experience of the conference as a speaker, especially I would say to the audience, because your feedback is very important for us, and also in future the events that you would like to see, in the topics that you would like to see, please do reach out to us. We have a big focus on healthy buildings, digital engineering and net zero, but beyond that we are focusing on other topics as well, so it would be highly appreciated to get your feedback and your comments on our LinkedIn page. Is someone taking a group photo?
What would that be? I can take one.
I'm not sure how that would work, but I can
I'm just using my
screen.
phone. Or yeah, that would work as well.
Yeah, screenshot would do.
Farah, put your camera back on.
No, it's not working. It might crash,
Oh,
so
no.
I'm not touching anything.
Okay then. Thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for a brilliant conversation. Amazing. Thank you. Have a great day, rest of the day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you all.